Helly wakes up lying on a table in front of a speaker, from which an unknown voice persistently asks her name. The girl tries to come to her senses and understand what's happening, but the voice doesn't answer her questions, repeating the same thing and insisting that Helly must undergo a short survey. Realizing she can't leave the room, she agrees to the testing but immediately realizes she knows none of the answers. She can't remember her own name, the state she was born in, or even what her mother looks like. Confused, Helly sits down on the floor, and at that moment, the door to the room opens. In the doorway, she sees the silhouette of a man. Shortly before this, sitting in his car, Mark Scout is having a breakdown, unable to stop crying. Finally, he composes himself, wipes his face and steps outside, then heads to work at the large Lumon Company building as if nothing happened. In the locker room, Scout changes his shoes, watch, and pass, swapping his name tag for a blue square with the company's logo. At the entrance, a guard searches him with a device resembling a metal detector, after which the clerk enters an elevator where he experiences slight dizziness that completely alters his state of mind. Easily navigating the maze of long, pristine corridors, Mark reaches his office designed for 4 clerks, labeled as the Macro Data Refinement Department. Each employee sitting at their personal computer selects random numbers from a multitude displayed on the screen. After a few minutes of work, Scout realizes that only 2 of his colleagues are present today. Pity, his partner and best friend, unexpectedly didn't come to work without notifying anyone. Milchick, the deputy director with a smile, enters the office and invites Mark to come with him. The men arrive at the office of Harmony Coble, the department head, who talks to the employee as if all her words are memorized in advance. She places a speaker in front of her, through which the board of directors participates in the meeting, but Mark hears nothing but strange hissing. Coble informs the clerk that Pity no longer works at the company, which greatly surprises and upsets Mark. No explanation for the news follows, but Mark is appointed the new team lead, replacing his good friend. Immediately after the appointment, Milchick leads Mark to a room with a microphone and monitors, where he will greet a new company employee for the first time. Thus, Mark becomes the voice and silhouette that Helly first encountered. When Scout enters the room with the frightened girl, he calmly starts explaining to her that she is now a Lumen employee. Ignoring Helly's questions and objections, Mark begins to read her important information about the importance of separating work and personal life until the girl finally loses it, throwing the speaker at the head of the boring man. But Helly fails to leave again and obediently sits down to listen to Mark, who seems to be about to clarify the situation. Unable to bear it any longer, Mark, breaking all instructions, hints to Helly that she needs to ask to leave 3 times, and after that, he finally leads her out of the room, also guiding her through the numerous white corridors. Eventually, the pair arrive at an exit which states that separated passage is prohibited, and Mark tells the girl she can leave the building. However, when Helly steps out the door, she finds herself in the same place she just left. Mark takes Helly to Harmony's office, who welcomes the new employee and gives her a disc, which should finally clarify everything. On it, the girl sees herself addressing herself, saying that she voluntarily participates in a program to separate consciousness into work and personal, where in each reality she will not remember another one. At 5 p.m., the workday in the offices ends, and the employees leave the building. Coming out of the elevator, none of them remembers where and how they worked, their colleagues, or anything from the day. When Mark almost hits Helly with his car, he doesn't recognize her, just as she doesn't recognize him. On the windshield of the car, the man finds an envelope from the company, stating he accidentally fell at work, and as an apology, the company gifts him a certificate to a nice restaurant. Naturally, he also doesn't remember that the bruise on his forehead appeared after interacting with Helly. Returning home, Mark confronts his strange neighbor, Mrs. Selvig, after which he plans to spend the evening as usual in front of the TV. But his pregnant sister Devon arrives and drags him to a dinner party with friends to shake up her relative who, in this reality, cannot get over his wife's death, which led him to agree to the severance procedure to sometimes forget his pain. The company gathers at the table of the strange hosts, who announce a dinner without food, serving only a glass of water. Reckon, Devon's husband, raises the topic of Mark being separated, which causes debates at the table. Devon convinces her brother to stay overnight, and the young people talk late into the night, reminiscing about their childhood and parents. Waking up at night to drink water, Mark Scout sees a strange man in the yard, hiding behind a tree and watching him. The next day, Mark decides to use his certificate and goes to the restaurant, where this same man joins him at the table and demands he hang up the phone during a conversation with his neighbor. The man turns out to be Mark's best friend, his partner Pitty, whom he doesn't remember in this reality. He hands his colleague an envelope with an address where he can be found and short explanations that he managed to remember everything despite the severance operation. Mrs. Selvig waits for her neighbor and apologizes to him for the constant conflicts over the trash bins. The woman caringly asks the man to sleep more and take care of himself. Looking at her, Mark doesn't recognize his boss Harmony Coble, and it's hard to tell if the boss knows they are also neighbors or if she also lives in two personalities. Helly continues her training at Lumen, but the girl still can't grasp what happened, despite Milchick explaining the severance operation to her in detail several times. A new workday begins. Mark tidies up the office, drinks coffee, and while wiping his desk, he focuses on a group photo featuring himself and his colleagues, including Pitty. He gathers identical pictures from all 4 desks and hides them in a closet to avoid being upset over his missing friend. When all the employees gather in the office, Mark explains to Helly what their job entails. She doesn't quite understand the purpose of searching for numbers, but she sits down and stares at the monitor along with the others. During the workday, the girl learns that her other version, the one living outside Lumen, is called an extra, but there's no way to communicate with her as the guard at the entrance checks for any text codes. Milchick gathers the team for a regular game where each participant talks about everything they remember and know, as well as their feelings and emotions. At the meeting, Mark shares his concerns about Pitty, saying he doesn't know if his friend is even alive. Milchick abruptly stops such conversations, reminding everyone that there are no deceased at Lumen as the company takes care of its employees. The team's fun ends with a new group photo, but Helly suddenly announces that she doesn't want to work there and plans to leave. Eventually, the girl realizes that this version of her can't leave the Lumen building at all. Moreover, the rebel ends up in the hands of Mr. Reiner, the head of security, but Mark manages to save his friend, preventing the boss from taking her to the break room. Returning home, Mark plans to read the postcard left by Pitty, but a knock at the door distracts him. Mrs. Selvig decides to visit her neighbor and offer him homemade cookies as an apology. After seeing off the guest, the man falls asleep and only remembers the letter the next morning. Calling in sick to work, he decides to skip a day and drives to the address mentioned in the postcard, finding an abandoned area of the city where he discovers his friend in an old greenhouse. One of Mark's colleagues, elderly Irving, falls asleep at his desk and gets a reprimand from the management before being sent to the staff psychologist. There, while waiting for his appointment, he meets Bert, a similarly aged employee from another department. Meeting Pitty, Mark learns about the restroom where employees monotonously apologize for their work misdemeanors. Pitty, who managed to cancel the severance, reveals that something terrible is happening at the company, which is why he is now being hunted. Mark takes his friend home and houses him in his basement. Pitty constantly suffers from headaches and hallucinations, often feeling like he's back at work. When he recovers, he tells Mark that there is no double life, and while they sit there, their other selves continue working in the office. Despite all the details, Mark repeats that he doesn't want to cancel the severance to avoid remembering his deceased wife, but Pitty tells his colleague that he has seen him with red eyes at work because even there he feels his pain, just not remembering what caused it. Reading the news in the morning, Mark announces that Helly's extra refused her resignation from Lumen. Pitty remains in the house alone and hears the door open upstairs. Watching from hiding, he recognizes his former boss in the uninvited guest. Helly constantly tries to pass a note to her extra, but Mark carefully watches the girl, and even when she decides to swallow a pen cap with the message inside, he informs her that the detector will show that too, leading to an unpleasant procedure to extract it. In the corridor, the office employees meet their colleagues, among whom is Bert, Irving's friend. The men exchange a few standard phrases and wink at each other. The entire company goes to the Personality Center to learn more about the creators and managers of Lumen, and Helly again uses the situation to try to escape. This time, Mark fails to cover for his friend, and Mr. Reiner takes the girl to the restroom, where she is forced to repeat words of apology and penance over 1,000 times for her behavior until she repents. Mark sees that the photos from the group photo session have arrived and decides to replace the old ones. Removing the pictures from their frames, he discovers a floor plan drawn by Pitty on one of them. At the same time, Pitty makes it to a night store and collapses there, unconscious. The ambulance is unable to help the man in time. All of this happens in front of Mark, and he quickly rushes home, where he removes all traces of his guest's stay in the basement. Having turned off the lights, he hears his colleague's mobile phone vibrating. Bert visits to give Irving the bags they sew in their department, ahead of the others, and also invites his friend to visit their office, to which Irving happily agrees. Helly returns to the office completely depressed after spending a whole day in the test. Mark tries to reason with his friend and make sure she doesn't provoke conflicts anymore. But finding the photo with the floor plan drawn by Pitty in Mark's desk, Helly accuses her colleague of hypocrisy as he convinces her to accept their situation, yet keeps such things himself. Bert shows Irving paintings in his department and at one point touches his friend's hand, after which Irving embarrassedly runs back to his workstation. Devon's husband leaves a gift on Mark's doorstep, his own book about the meaning of life without severance. However, when Harmony broke into her neighbor's house, she took the book and brought it to work. Returning to the office, Irving noticed the bright cover, but besides the book itself, he was surprised by something else. The first page had a dedication stating the book was intended for Mark Scout. Irving brought his colleague to explain what this all meant, but naturally Mark could not remember his relative or anything from his external life. Not wanting to give up, Helly found a paper cutter in the office and, threatening to harm herself, demanded permission to record a message for her extra. Receiving a response, she realized that it was not so much about the company as about herself. The response from Helly in the outside world was such that she should obediently continue her work at Lumen. Pitty's hidden phone in the basement keeps vibrating, but seeing an unknown number on the screen, Mark hesitates to answer the call. Mark goes to the funeral home to say goodbye to his friend and is surprised to see his neighbor Mrs. Selvig there, who also did not expect to meet him. Both lie to each other about the reason for their visit, but the woman keeps an eye on her neighbor. At the ceremony, Mark meets the deceased friend's ex-wife and daughter, and they immediately guess where the man knew their family head from. Waiting for everyone to be occupied with saying goodbye, Harmony sneaks up to the body and extracts the severance chip from his head. Arriving home, Mark changes his mind about going in and drives to the place where his wife once died. Harmony brings the chip to work and entrusts Milchick to check it in the laboratory to find out how the man managed to cancel the severance. Also, the woman calls Casey, asking the staff psychologist to conduct a session with Mark, as she fears he will also be tempted to cancel the severance. Locked in the bathroom, Mark reads the stolen book about the meaning of life. When it's time for the session, the man obediently comes at the appointed time. The psychologist lights a candle that Harmony stole from a box with personal belongings of Mark's deceased wife. The boss herself watches the conversation through a monitor. Helly, after saying goodbye to her colleagues, goes home. In the elevator, the girl brings a trash bin and a rope, as she can no longer endure the monotonous days without the possibility of liberation. Tying the rope to the elevator ceiling, the girl knocks the trash bin from under her feet. Mark calls the elevator at the end of the workday, and when the doors open, he sees lifeless Helly. Trying to save his colleague, he calls for help, and Mr. Reiner appears immediately, ordering Mark to quickly get into the elevator to avoid additional witnesses. Coming to work the next day, the first thing Mark remembers is the incident with Helly. Stepping onto the floor, he is immediately taken in by Harmony and Milchick, who reprimand the department head for not keeping an eye on his employee. Harmony gives Pitty's chip to Reiner and instructs him to find out who and how managed to hack it and restore the consciousness of the separated. The man asks if the head informed the board of directors about what happened to Helly, but Harmony avoids answering. Locked in the bathroom, Mark continues reading the stolen book, which increasingly inspires him. After work, the guy takes his things from the locker and sees many voice messages from Rickon, informing that Devon will soon give birth and everyone expects the brother to be with her. Mark heads straight to the maternity cottage settlement to support his relative. In a conversation with Rickon, he learns about the book he left on his porch as a surprise, but it never reached its owner. Devon steps out of the cottage to find coffee and meets another pregnant woman. The future mothers talk and discuss their unborn children, but Devon has to return as her contractions intensify. Comforting his sister, Mark shares his suspicions about Lumen and his intention to find out what the company is up to. Psychologist Miss Casey comes to the office tasked with monitoring Helly and reporting any signs of melancholy and sadness to the management. Despite the specialist's surveillance, Mark manages to take his colleague to another wing to talk without eavesdroppers. Wandering the corridors, the pair find a department where goats are raised, which greatly surprises them. This further confirms that none of the separated employees even suspect what the company is working on. Irving meets with Bert in the conference room, but their conversation is immediately interrupted by Dylan, who forbids his co-worker from interacting with an employee from another department. Miss Casey finds the runaways and brings them back to the office, watched by Harmony through a monitor. Mark explains their escape as a health walk he took his colleague on. At home, the head receives a call from Reiner, informing her that they have tracked the source of the hack on Pitty's chip. According to the security officer, it could only have been done by one person, former Lumen employee, Gabby. Mark takes out his friend's phone from the box and sees that the unknown number is still calling. After giving birth, Devon goes for a walk in the park with her baby and sees the same woman she met in the maternity cottage. Waving at her and not receiving a response, the young mother decides to approach, but it becomes clear that her friend does not remember her at all. Furthermore, the baby she holds is named differently than she introduced him in their conversation, and when asked why the name was changed, the woman cannot answer, as if she doesn't understand the topic at all. The 4 employees of the Macro Data Refinement Department gather in the cafeteria, and Mark and Helly suggest to their colleagues that they explore the building and meet other departments. However, the timid and law-abiding Irving and Dylan do not approve of such behavior. Harmony summons Mark and informs him that Miss Casey has been punished and sent to the restroom for not keeping an eye on Helly on the day Mark took her out of the office. The 4 decide to meet Bert's department and find out what they do. While the colleagues get acquainted, Dylan explores the unfamiliar office and finds interesting cards. He manages to slip one into his pocket before an unhappy Milchick arrives to return the curious clerks to their workplace. Back in the office, they are greeted by Harmony. After solemnly singing the Lumen anthem, the head sends Mark to the restroom, where he meets an exhausted Casey. Devon looks for a lactation consultant, and her advertisement is answered by an experienced nurse. When she arrives at the home of the young parents, the woman recognizes her as her brother's neighbor, Mrs. Selbig. As soon as the helper takes the baby girl in her arms and she stops crying, the couple trusts her, and Devon doesn't question how Selbig ended up there. A boy sits in front of the TV with cartoons, closing his eyes and counting to 1,000, starting to lose count. Dylan sits in the locker room not understanding where he is, and Milchick appears, demanding to know where the clerk hid the card from the neighboring department. Suddenly, a boy bursts into the closet and jumps on Dylan's neck, calling him Dad. The man realizes that his work consciousness has been transferred to the life of his extra, and this is what his life outside Lumen looks like. Waking up at night, Mark turns on Pitty's phone and answers the call. A woman's voice understands who she is talking to and arranges a meeting. Arriving at the college, Mark meets Gabby. She was the one who installed chips in all the separated, and now she's trying to fix the situation. During the conversation, Reiner appears out of nowhere, but the woman deals with him, explaining that he poses a threat to everyone trying to pull the separated out. Gabby sends Mark home and promises to contact him to help him retrieve his another personality that is constantly at Lumen. She hands the clerk Reiner's pass, which is untraceable and opens any door, and instructs him to take it to work, hoping that the other Mark will understand how to use it. Arriving at work, Dylan inquires Milchick about what happened and who the boy was who called him Dad. The man can't think of anything else, realizing he has a different life going on somewhere else. The supervisor tries to gloss over the question, and knowing Dylan's love for rewards and incentives, promises him special bonuses, explaining that it was a random activation that went a little off plan. The employees learn that they are now working under lock and key to prevent wandering the corridors and interacting with colleagues from other departments. Harmony visits Devon's house daily as a consultant, but in reality, she tries to gather more information about Mark. Over a cup of tea, she finally learns that the man has questions and doubts about his job and already regrets having separated. Milchick comes to the office and announces a 5-minute music and dance event to keep the team's spirits up. During the dance, Mark discovers a pass in his pocket, but realizes it's probably a handover from his extra, so he hides it back to use at a more opportune moment. The music break abruptly ends as Dylan attacks Milchick, demanding he tell him about the son he accidentally saw during the switch. The clerk tells his colleagues about his awakening and how he saw his son, and now he wants to cancel the severance. Helly realizes there is some way to awaken and only needs to find out the details to return to normal life. Of the 4, only Irving disagrees with breaking the community's rules, also trying to dissuade his friends. Using Reiner's card, the group exits into the corridor. But Irving leaves his friends and heads to the neighboring department to find out what happened to his friend Bert. Mark and Helly decide not to waste time and find the control point, which can manage all Lumen employees. Taking the manual with them, the pair returns to the office to avoid being caught by Harmony. Irving arrives at the other department and finds himself at a party celebrating Bert's retirement. Horrified, he realizes he will never see his friend again and tries to explain that the only way to leave Lumen is for one reason, but everyone pretends not to hear his arguments. Dylan studies the instructions, and the employees find out that not everyone can switch. Someone has to manage the process from inside. The guy volunteers to do this so that everyone else can escape to the outside world and find those who can help them cancel the severance. Returning to his department, Irving tells his friends that he will look for a way out with them, wishing to erase Lumen from existence. Irving's extra sits on a bench in the park with his pet. Returning home, the man approaches the easel and paints a picture using only black colors. Dozens of absolutely identical black paintings already stand against the walls. Harmony calls Mark and schedules his last session with Mrs. Casey, supposedly to close the quarter. In the office, the man learns that the psychologist is working her last day and is being replaced by another specialist. The employees await Dylan's waffle party, planning to use this time for the switch. Trying to act as calm as possible, they rehearse their escape plan. The board of directors learns about the incident with Helly in the elevator and suspends Harmony from managing the company. Using the stolen pass, Mark sends his friends outside one by one, leaving himself for last. Dylan heads to the waffle party, then sneaks away to the control center to start the operation. Each employee, once in the outside world, must carefully study their extra's life and figure out who in their circle they can ask for help. Harmony, devastated by her dismissal after so many years of loyal service, is at home when the doorbell rings. Resuming her disguise as Mrs. Selvig, she opens the door to find Mark, who inquires if she'll attend the event Devin and Rickon are organizing for their book release. Initially citing poor health, Mrs. Selvig eventually agrees to attend, saying she'll arrive a bit later. When she arrives at the party, she tries to stick close to Mark to learn why he wants to leave Lumen. Dylan breaks into the control room and locks himself in, preparing to launch his friends. Reaching the controls, he pulls the levers and the process begins. Finding himself in Devin's house, Mark's extra doesn't recognize anyone. The same happens with Irving and Helly. Irving finds himself at an easel with a black canvas, while Helly is at a reception among influential people. After learning from the guest that Devin is his sister, Mark tries to speak with her alone for help, but he can't manage it due to the crowd and commotion in the house. Exploring his apartment, Irving realizes he's alone except for his dog. He finds military awards and a locked chest containing items and photos of his son who died in the war. Helly's situation is the most complex. While examining the hall, she realizes she's not just a participant in the severance program, but a direct descendant of Lumen's founders, the daughter of the current company owner. Her extra is supposed to give a speech today about the benefits of having two entities and not wasting personal life on work. At the bottom of the chest, Irving finds strange records and a map with many marks. It becomes clear his extra has long been trying to unravel Lumen's mystery. Gathering everything, he finds car keys and plans to drive to Bert, whose name he found marked on the map. Guests at Devin's house attentively listen to Rickon, but Mark is preoccupied with finding help. Noticing his boss, he doesn't immediately realize she shouldn't be there. Addressing Harmony by her last name, he inadvertently reveals himself and his plan. In a hurry, he runs to his sister, leaving Harmony in confusion. Devin hands the baby over to the feeding assistant and finally makes time for her brother, who tells her that it's actually his another person, and he urgently needs help to get out of the trap. The woman doesn't fully understand what's happening, but she tells Mark that her brother decided to have surgery, unable to cope with the pain of his wife Gemma's death. Helly, watching her own interview on huge screens advocating the benefits of severance, feels dizzy and hides in the restroom, where her father finds her and expects a vibrant and emotional performance. Mark asks his sister about his boss from Lumen being at her party, and based on Devin's description, realizes she has entrusted her child to a terrifying woman. Rushing out of the room, Devin begins searching for her daughter but finds neither the nanny, her car, nor the girl. Eventually, a guest finds the baby carrier in an empty room. Meanwhile, Harmony races to Lumen, simultaneously calling Milchick to inform him of the emergency. The three employees have escaped to the outside world. Milchick rushes to the control room, trying to negotiate with Dylan to open the door. Realizing that bonuses and incentives won't work in this situation, the supervisor promises to tell him not only about the boy from the closet, but also about his 2 children. Dylan remains steadfast, but Milchick understands he needs to enter the room, so he cuts the belt Dylan used to lock himself in. Arriving at the specified address, Irving sees his friend from the neighboring department relaxing with a companion in his own home. Helly prepares to go on stage, intending to tell everyone the truth. Mark, left alone in the room, decides to look at family photos, and on one of them, he sees himself with his deceased wife. To his horror, it turns out to be Mrs. Casey. Harmony manages to arrive at the gala event and tells Helly she knows everything. Unfazed, Helly whispers her plans to her boss and takes the stage, despite threats that she will make her friends suffer. Irving decides to step out of the car and knocks on Bert's door to tell him the truth about working at Lumen. Mark tells his sister that his wife is alive and he knows where to find her, while Helly starts speaking from the stage, revealing that all the sweet stories about severance are pure lies and that extras suffer, trapped. At that moment, Milchick cuts the belt, bursts into the control room, and pushes Dylan away from the levers. All the escapees return their extras consciousness of personal life. This concludes the first season. Clearly, many questions remain unanswered. Most importantly, what exactly do the employees at Lumen Company do? Hopefully, we will get the answers in the second season, set to release in 2024. The movie begins by introducing us to the young protagonist, Vesper, who lives in a dystopian world sharply divided between the privileged elites and the struggling masses. The elite reside in secure, enclosed cities known as citadels, while the rest of humanity faces the challenges of survival in harsh conditions. In this world, the key to sustenance is unique seeds provided by the citadels. These seeds are genetically coded to yield just a single harvest, ensuring a constant dependency on the citadels for more. Vesper, amidst her struggle for survival in this harsh environment, shares her existence with her paralyzed father, Darius, a former army serviceman. Ingeniously, Darius's consciousness has been transferred into a drone, enabling him to accompany and communicate with his daughter as she navigates their dangerous world. Vesper is not only resourceful and brave, venturing out daily to forage, but she also possesses a keen understanding of biology and biohacking. However, their lives take a dramatic turn when Vesper returns home one afternoon to discover they've been robbed. The generator powering their home, including the critical machine sustaining Darius, has been sabotaged. Faced with no other choice to save her father, Vesper sets out to seek help from a neighboring farm. Upon arrival at the farm, Vesper encounters a troubling scene. The farm faces its own challenges with a jug, a genetically engineered human designed for labor, but devoid of intelligence. The jug has been injured, rendering it useless, and Jonas, the farm's leader and Darius's brother, instructs a young boy to kill it. After witnessing this unsettling event, Vesper approaches Jonas with a request for bacteria to restore their generator. In exchange, she offers a blood donation, a valuable commodity used by Jonas to trade for seeds from the citadels. Jonas expresses a desire for her to join their community, offering to care for her father as well. Vesper, however, is deeply unsettled by Jonas's intentions. She suspects that Jonas wants to use her as a breeder, a role she strongly rejects. After completing her blood donation, Vesper faces a dire situation when Jonas refuses to immediately provide the bacteria she needs in exchange. He explains that he must first sell the blood, a process that will take several days, time her father Darius does not have. In desperation and anger, Vesper attempts to reclaim her blood, only to be caught and forcefully expelled from the farm by Jonas. Undeterred, Vesper returns to the farm, exploiting a secret entry point known only to her. Vesper stealthily enters Jonas's lab and retrieves the bacteria she is owed. While there, she also manages to take some seeds acquired from the citadel. As Vesper heads home, she promptly repairs the generator and begins experimenting with the stolen seeds, hoping to unlock their fertility. In the forest, Vesper stumbles upon Camellia, a woman from the citadel, lying unconscious yet alive, with plants feeding off of her. Vesper acts quickly, clearing the plants and bringing Camellia back to their home, where she treats her wounds. Camellia then reveals that she was in the crashed glider Vesper had seen and is now desperately searching for her father, who is with her. Although not fully recovered, Camellia promises a reward for their help. Vesper agrees to assist in the search, despite Darius's objections. The following morning, Vesper sets out on her mission and soon locates the crashed glider, finding Camellia's father Elias inside. However, she's not alone in this discovery. Jonas and a group of survivalists also converge on the crash site. Jonas, cold and indifferent to Elias's pleas, decides to end his life simply because he is from the Citadel. When Vesper attempts to intervene, Jonas dismissively shoves her aside. He also uncovers a woman's scarf in the glider, deducing that another passenger, Camellia, needs to be found. Back home, Darius suggests informing the Citadel of the situation before Camellia takes any drastic action or Jonas finds her. However, the only way to communicate with the Citadel is through a transceiver located at Jonas's house. Vesper reluctantly agrees to the plan, lying to Camellia that her search was fruitless, but promising to continue the next day. After a while, Camellia earns Vesper's trust. Vesper then decides to reveal her secret greenhouse. This greenhouse is a testament to Vesper's ingenuity, housing a variety of bioengineered plants, each with unique abilities and characteristics. Vesper takes pride in her creations, but still hopes to develop a plant capable of producing edible seeds. While Vesper tends to her plants, Darius quietly confides in Camellia. He admits he knows they can never gain access to a Citadel, but implores her to be kind, as Vesper's dream of reaching the Citadel means everything to her. Later, Vesper questions why they are excluded from the Citadel, to which Camellia explains the leadership's fear of resource scarcity. Vesper suggests they could take on the worst jobs, but Camellia points out the Citadel's preference for control. Unlike humans, the genetically engineered laborers, or jugs, don't resist. That evening, they share a musical moment, with Vesper singing while Camellia plays her mother's old instrument. The next day, Vesper once again sneaks into Jonas's house to use the transceiver. This time, however, Jonas spots Darius's drone and seizes it. While pretending to repair the drone, Jonas confronts Vesper about the missing seeds and the unidentified passenger, expressing his hatred for liars, especially within his own family. Vesper, refusing to admit anything, snatches the drone and flees, only to find it can't fly and crashes. In her attempt to recover the drone, Vesper stumbles upon a grim sight: the body of Jonas's assistant, who helped here before, left to die under a tree. Before she can process whether he was killed for aiding her, Jonas's followers apprehend her. They forcefully mark her hand with a seal, symbolizing her as Jonas's property. Distraught and overwhelmed, Vesper returns home, where Camellia immediately offers comfort. Guilt-ridden by her own deceit, Vesper breaks down and confesses to Camellia that Elias is dead. In a moment of stark revelation, Vesper decides to show Camellia the truth by taking her to see her father Elias's body, now tragically floating in the river. The sight overwhelms Camellia, leading to an intense emotional breakdown. She clings desperately to her father in grief, forcing Vesper to intervene and pull her from the river. During this intense moment, Vesper notices an unusual scar on Camellia's back that reacts peculiarly to her touch. This discovery leads to a shocking truth. Camellia is not a human, but a highly advanced jug, a creation of Elias, who was expelled from the Citadel for creating an intelligent slave. Camellia confesses her deception. She had been on the run and never had the capability to get Vesper and Darius into the Citadel. Angered by this betrayal, Vesper confronts Camellia physically before they return home. Once there, Vesper coldly tells Camellia to leave after she cleans up. Meanwhile, Vesper repairs the drone and shares the day's events with Darius. Darius, understanding the complex situation, urges Vesper to be more compassionate towards Camellia, explaining that jugs are bound to their programming and have no real choice in their actions. At the same time, Camellia, grappling with her lost purpose and fearing capture by the Citadel, contemplates ending her life. However, Vesper, influenced by her father's words, intervenes just in time. Realizing Camellia's potential contribution to her research, Vesper proposes to use a sample of Camellia's cells. The process proves challenging, as Camellia's cells are secured just like the Citadel's seeds. In an attempt to ease Vesper's frustration, Camellia plays music. Miraculously, the music unlocks Camelia's cells, allowing Vesper to modify the Citadel seeds successfully, creating a sustainable food source. And all it took was a little nickelback. Needing more supplies for further research, Vesper briefly leaves for the old lab with the drone. During her absence, Camelia stays to watch over Darius, which leads to a dangerous encounter when Jonas arrives. Initially, Camelia tries to feign innocence, but Jonas sees through her act and threatens Darius's life. Camelia agrees to go with Jonas without resistance. However, Jonas soon discovers the mark on her back, identifying her as a jug, and attempts to reprogram her to obey him. Vesper returns just in time, and a fierce struggle ensues, with Vesper, the drone, and Camelia fighting against Jonas. They manage to overpower him, but Vesper refuses to kill him. Instead, she strikes a deal. She will share the secret of the fertile seeds with Jonas if he agrees not to alert the Citadel. Despite Jonas's apparent agreement, he betrays them by contacting the Citadel and revealing Camelia's location. As night falls and Vesper completes her work on the seeds, their moment of triumph is cut short. Darius's drone detects an external threat, signaling the Citadel's approach. A weird organism invades their home, releasing a toxic substance. Darius, with his military background, quickly recognizes the danger and instructs Vesper and Camelia not to breathe until the threat subsides. Camelia, feeling responsible for the imminent danger, offers to surrender herself to protect Vesper and Darius. However, Darius refuses to let her sacrifice herself, knowing the Citadel will pursue Vesper regardless. Instead, he devises a plan to distract the soldiers, giving Vesper and Camelia a chance to escape. Vesper is initially reluctant to leave her father behind in the face of the impending threat from the Citadel's soldiers. However, Darius persuades her to take cover nearby, assuring her that he will handle the situation. He plans to tell the soldiers that there is no jug present, drawing on his experience as a former army man to communicate effectively with them. As the soldiers approach, their first stop is Jonas's farm, where they eliminate him and his group. Meanwhile, Vesper and Camelia take painstaking efforts to make Darius's home appear abandoned. They cover everything up and take the valuable, unlocked seeds with them as they hide in the forest. Unbeknownst to Vesper, her father's actual plan is to sacrifice himself by self-destructing the drone, hoping to take the soldiers down with him. From their hiding spot in the forest, Vesper witnesses the explosion and, driven by desperation, tries to rush back to aid her father. Camelia, recognizing the danger of this action, stops her, reminding her that it's too late to do anything for Darius. Their situation worsens when two soldiers, having survived the explosion, start pursuing them. Vesper leads Camelia through a swamp, aware that it is filled with dangerous plants that could potentially eliminate their pursuers. Their tactic proves effective, as the first soldier falls victim to one of these lethal plants. The second soldier, however, learns from his comrade's fate and cautiously avoids the same trap. Vesper and Camelia, in an attempt to remain undetected, crawl on their knees and hide behind bushes. Unfortunately, another plant betrays their position with a noise, alerting the soldier to their location. Facing imminent danger, Vesper and Camelia decide to take the offensive. They attack the soldier, seize his weapon, and manage to force him into the deadly plant's trapping zone, resulting in his death. The distant sound of approaching gliders signals more danger. Realizing that the Citadel will never cease their pursuit as long as she is with Vesper, Camelia makes a difficult decision. She understands that Vesper and the precious seeds will always be in danger as long as she remains. Despite Vesper's protests, Camelia gently puts her to sleep and conceals her under fallen leaves before surrendering to the soldiers. The next morning, Vesper awakens to find her home reduced to ashes. She plants some of the unlocked seeds in the remnants of her old garden, a symbol of hope and renewal. In the aftermath, she encounters a group of children who survived the attack on Jonas's farm. Together, they decide to follow the mysterious people that wander around, seeking to uncover their destination. Their journey leads them to a towering structure constructed by these people. Driven by a sense of purpose, Vesper climbs to the top of the tower. There, she releases the seeds from her hand, allowing the wind to carry them to various corners of the land. This symbolic act represents her hope that the seeds will grow and multiply, providing sustenance for all. The movie concludes on this note, leaving a lasting impression of resilience and the enduring power of hope. In a cabin in the middle of the forests of North Carolina, two people live. a woman named Nydia, and her blind son Solomon. The only thing left from the father, a hunter, is an audio recording where he explains to the boy that they were forced to move to this place in the hope that his mother would be able to heal. But the hope was in vain. Nydia's condition only worsened. On that day, the mother calls her son to check the traps. Before leaving the house, the boy habitually ties a rope to his belt, the other end of which is attached to the porch. This measure is necessary so that the child can always find his way home, and so that the mother knows in which direction to look for him if something happens. The woman teaches Solomon how to set and find traps for animals and approves of how quickly he learns. Later, she shows him how to properly skin animals without damaging the fur, which can then be used to make clothing. One day, the curious boy catches an insect and traps it in a jar, only to be saddened when he notices that the beetle no longer makes any sound. The mother explains that living creatures cannot survive like this. They need air, food, and water. One day, the woman suggests that the child go fishing to celebrate the birthday of his deceased father, who loved this activity and always took Solomon with him. Afterward, she plans to bake a cake, which excites the boy. The pair head to the river. Suddenly, Solomon notes that all the animals and birds seem to have disappeared, and a ringing silence surrounds them. The woman, who also notices this, jokes that they were scared of the boy and warned the fish in the river. The boy relaxes, but the unpleasant feeling remains in his soul. Sitting by the shore, he suddenly asks questions about death. Nydia is surprised but explains that death is simply a change of existence, like a chrysalis turning into a butterfly. Life continues but in a different form. But why is Solomon interested in this? After all, he is young, full of energy, and will live for a long time. After sitting by the shore with their fishing rods and not getting a bite, the woman suggests that the boy dig up some worms. He happily agrees and ventures deeper into the forest. The boy finds some worms near a rotten tree and feels an iron chain under the leaves. But as soon as he tries to pull it to find out where it leads, the mother arrives, sensing something suspicious in the forest. She praises her son for finding the worms, but suggests they finish fishing for the day. The pair return home, where the mother tends to the household chores, the garden and the goat, which provides them with milk. Solomon helps dig up root vegetables. The mother praises her son for his help, hiding that she feels worse and worse. In the evening, she bakes the promised cake and suggests that her son sing the traditional song, but the boy doesn't like it. Then Nydia offers to let him blow out the candle on the cake in front of him, and Solomon fulfills the request, but he refuses to share his wish, believing it won't come true if he does. At night, the mother plays an audio recording she and the boy's father made for little Solomon. They tell a story about a little goat that once ran into the forest where a terrible monster lived. The parents loved their little goat very much and were inconsolable, but the goat, seeing the monster, managed to escape and return home, bringing great joy to his mother and father. They hugged him, and he promised never to return to the dark forest again. After listening to the story again, Solomon again raises the question of death, as he didn't understand his mother's earlier explanation. Then Nydia tells him about faith. However, the boy barely understands and declares that he believes in his mother above all else. The years pass, but one day the mother disappears, leaving the boy only a recording of her voice, in which she says goodbye to her son and reminds him of the 3 main rules of their life. He must always share with the forest everything he gets from it, half for him, half for the forest. The second rule, when he feels down and ready to give up, he must sing their song. And the third rule, he must never take off the rope. Time passes. Solomon becomes a teenager. He has fully adapted to life alone, hunting, fishing, chopping wood, and checking traps on his own. When he feels particularly sad, he listens to the tapes with the voices of his loved ones. One day, while eating near the house, the boy hears a strange sound from the thicket. Putting down his plate, he rushes into the forest but finds nothing unusual, though he senses someone's presence nearby. Before bed, he listens to his mother's voice recording again. However, he cannot sleep. The boy gets up and leaves the house. Then he hears the plaintive bleating of his goat and runs towards the sound until the rope reaches its limit. At the very edge of the rope's reach, he manages to feel the goat's body in the grass, but at that moment, something unknown grabs the animal and drags it into the depths of the forest. Feeling his hands, the boy realizes they are covered in blood and tries to wipe it off. Morning comes. Solomon is frightened but continues to live according to his established routine, but one day he suddenly hears a gunshot in the forest. The boy rushes in that direction and stumbles upon a dead deer. But then, a man emerges from the trees, claiming it as his kill. Frightened, Solomon begins to wave his knife, and the stranger is forced to knock him out with the butt of his rifle. The boy comes to his senses, near his house. The hunter, sitting opposite, tends to his wound, apologizing for the harm caused. He read the name on the knife, Lucas, and assumes that's the boy's name. But the boy admits that it was his father's name, who is now gone. The hunter apologizes again, saying he didn't mean to scare him, and noticing the rope, he carried him back to the house. Hank, the man's name, asks the young man why he lives alone and where his parents are, as the boy looks very young. But Solomon doesn't answer. The day is already ending, so the hunter asks for permission to spend the night in the house. In return, he offers some painkillers. When the boy refuses, as he doesn't know what pills are, Hank promises to cook a hot meal from the deer, and Solomon agrees. Hank examines the house from the inside and realizes that the young man has never left its boundaries and therefore simply doesn't know about the outside world. Meanwhile, the boy listens to his mother's last message, huddled in the corner of his room, feeling uncomfortable in the presence of a stranger. Hank finds homemade books that Solomon's mother made for him and feels sorry for the boy. He behaves kindly and generously offers the young man the soup he prepared. He again offers to help the boy, saying he can guide him to people and help him settle into the big world. But Solomon refuses, which Hank attributes to his deep love for home, lamenting that he himself doesn't have one. He again asks about the parents, saying the boy looks a lot like the woman in the photo, perhaps that is his mother. After dinner, they go to bed, though Solomon doesn't part with his knife, but realizing that Hank poses no threat, he finally lies down. However, in the middle of the night, both are awakened by a loud and terrifying sound, similar to the roar of an unknown animal. Hank, armed with a flashlight and rifle, goes outside to check what's happening. It's quiet around the house, and the man heads into the forest. Soon he finds blood traces at the base of a tree and realizes that some animal has died there. On the tree itself there are bloody marks and the bark is scraped off. Stopping, Hank surveys the area through his scope and notices something suspicious in the bushes. He fires, but the creature leaps from behind the tree with a terrifying roar and charges at him. Realizing he missed, the hunter runs. Reaching the house, he sees Solomon in some sort of trance. The boy just sways from side to side, humming a tune to himself, and doesn't respond to the man's questions. Hank, getting no answers, leaves him alone. After all, he believes he scared off the beast, and now they are safe. The man promises to get the boy out of the forest so he can live a normal life, unafraid of any monster. In the morning, Hank finds Solomon in the shed. He offers to repair it since all the necessary materials are there, except for the chain. Solomon recalls finding a chain in the forest as a child and takes Hank to the spot. The man marvels at how the boy navigates using the rope. The boy explains that it's the only way to survive. Soon they find the place. Hank, noticing the chain, grabs it and starts pulling, but realizing it's tied to something, he follows it and finds some kind of burrow. Nearby lie metal shears, which surprises Hank. However, he cuts off a piece of the chain and returns with it to the house. While the man works on the repairs, Solomon asks for a piece of venison, and after receiving permission, throws it into the bushes. To the hunter's surprise, the boy explains that it's a rule. Everything taken from the forest must be shared with it, as his parents taught him. The hunter believes this practice explains the appearance of the beast they heard at night. He suggests they set a trap for the monster to ensure the boy's safety. He also extends the rope, giving the young man the ability to explore new areas. Soon they both head in the direction where Hank saw the unknown beast. Cautiously moving between the trees, they reach the edge of the previously marked area. Suddenly, something unknown grabs the rope and starts pulling Solomon. The terrified hunter chases after the boy, and catching up with the abandoned Solomon, immediately leads him back to the house. Hank tries to calm the young man, assuring him that the beast won't enter the house and they will definitely catch it in the traps they set. He also found his mother's diary and offers to read it to Solomon. The boy listens intently, a thoughtful smile appearing as he hears the lines filled with love and tenderness directed at him. But suddenly Hank stops reading mid-sentence, having read something terrifying. Not wanting to scare the boy, he assures him it's already late and they should go to sleep. As always, Solomon listens to his mother's recording before bed and then goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Hank, making sure the boy's asleep, leaves the house and heads to the place where they found the chain. He approaches the burrow, sees a pile of gnawed bones in front of it, and realizes that this is the lair of the beast. Meanwhile, Solomon wakes up and begins to search for his new friend, and Hank, with his rifle ready, approaches the burrow and suddenly sees a notebook similar to the one in Solomon's house. But this one is scribbled with simple doodles. Deciding that the find has no value, the man puts it back. Meanwhile, realizing that Hank is not around, Solomon sits on the porch and turns on the tape recorder, listening to his mother's voice. But at that moment, he hears a gunshot in the forest. Finding the rope, Solomon runs into the forest, where he suddenly stumbles over Hank's backpack and realizes that the man is somewhere nearby. At that moment, the rope's length ends. For the first time in his life, Solomon breaks the rule and takes it off to find his friend. He crawls around and finds Hank's lifeless body. Solomon mourns his loss when he hears someone standing before him. The terrifying, disheveled creature turns out to be Solomon's mother. Making inhuman sounds, she charges at him, but the chain restrains her. To drive away his fear, Solomon begins to hum the childhood melody. This makes the woman stop, and when she begins to hum along, the boy recognizes her. He cautiously approaches her, and when she lunges at him, she impales herself on a knife and dies. Her eyes, with strange vertical pupils, go still. The young man, coughing heavily, leans against a tree. Trying to recover from everything he's been through, he suddenly hears a crow cawing and looks up at the sky. And then, in his milky eyes, vertical pupils appear, meaning that along with his sight, he has inherited his mother's illness, becoming the new forest beast. A depressingly dull film that exudes hopelessness, cold, and a sense of inevitable futility. But the metaphor with the rope is very apt. A person should never lose their connection to home. Japan 2023. People board a train and head to work. Everyone is busy with their own things, scrolling through Instagram feeds, making acquaintances on social networks, and discussing plans for the evening, unaware that in just a few minutes, their lives will change forever. Suddenly, the train's speed increases, and strange things start happening. A bottle cap rolling on the floor of the carriage suddenly disappears. Passengers begin receiving alerts about powerful earthquakes on their phones. Then the train enters a gloomy tunnel and comes to a sudden halt. People regain consciousness, bewildered by what has happened. One of the passengers opens the entrance doors, and people, screaming and pushing each other, rush to the exit, jumping from the high steps. But once outside, they can't believe their eyes. Traces of the civilized world are gone, and they are surrounded by the remnants of a destroyed city, overgrown with trees and grass. Moreover, all the carriages have disappeared without a trace, except for the fifth one they were in. As time passes, the passengers begin to get acquainted. One of the guys, Shirahama, a firefighter, examines the injured and suggests checking the tunnel behind the carriage. He is joined by a girl named Katana and a guy named Hayashima, who also wants to understand what happened. Meanwhile, the police in the city cannot figure out where the last two carriages have gone, while the rest of the train, along with the passengers, remains undamaged. The three volunteers enter the tunnel and walk through the dark underworld for a long time. Suddenly, they notice a light ahead and hurry towards it, but when they emerge outside, they are astonished. There is nothing around that would remind them of the year 2023 with skyscrapers and technology, just a vast, lifeless desert. Shocked, the trio returns to their fellow misfortune mates. Initially, people do not believe their report, but after Hayashima shows a video recording of the surroundings, they are forced to accept the new reality. After 7 hours, people languish in anticipation of rescuers, when one of the girls, Reni, secretly looks into Hayashima's bag and finds a letter marked with the criminal department's seals, leading her to suspect that the guy's a criminal. Then Reni snatches food from Katana's bag, but, thinking she was seen, discards the package. Hayashima picks it up and carries it to the train, just as Katana discovers the theft. Seeing it in the guy's hands, the passengers accuse him of theft. Moreover, Reni reports about the letter from the colony. Offended, Hayashima denies the accusations and announces his departure. At this time, Shirahama pulls out a box of fruits and offers to share them. While Katana is distributing the food, one of the guys reviews the video he made earlier, clearly showing Reni stealing the food. Realizing that Hayashima is innocent, Shirahama and Katana run after him, managing to save the guy who nearly falls into a deep ditch. In gratitude, he confesses that he works as a hairdresser and is already 30 years old. But he refuses to explain the origin of the letter from the colony. Night falls. Passengers somehow settle down to sleep, but many cannot sleep, worrying about their future. In the morning, people begin to realize that they may never return home. Shirahama tries to gather the scattering people, but a friend asks the guide not to take responsibility for others' lives. Then the firefighter confesses that because of him, his colleague was injured, losing the ability to walk. Now he believes he must help everyone he can. Together, they catch up with those who left and persuade them to return to the carriage to solve problems collectively. Seeing this, Hayashima remembers his brother who was in prison, and the letter in his bag was from him. Fate had it that he had to take on the upbringing of his younger brother, and he still feels guilty for his older brother becoming a criminal. Meanwhile, a couple of passengers explore the surrounding area and find the ruins of a high tower. This is particularly strange because the news reported its construction, which was supposed to be completed in 2026, and one of the passengers found a can in the forest dated that year. A biologist among them encountered a plant whose genetic modification takes 30 years. It turns out that they are in the distant future of Earth, and it's far from a joyful discovery. At the same time in 2023, all channels are broadcasting messages about the disappearance of 2 carriages, which had at least 100 passengers. Night approaches and many fall into despair, while Katana and Shirahama place plastic containers on the roof of the carriage, hoping for rain. In the morning, the biologist draws the others' attention to the dense greenery, which means there must be a body of water nearby. A group of youth sets out to explore the forest. Along the way, Hayashima confesses that his parents are criminals, and then the guy spots a frog. This means water is very close, but ahead are impassable cliffs, which can only be climbed with the help of ropes. The group returns to the train and cutting wires heads back to the cliffs. Shirahama climbs to the top and joyfully shouts upon seeing a waterfall, but looking around he is horrified. Instead of Mount Fuji, a sea stretches out before him. Returning, he tells the others about this, and people start to speculate what happened to their planet. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but the eldest passenger, Tanaka, goes outside and sees an unfamiliar person. But when he tells about it, no one believes him. Then it starts to rain, helping people to collect water and even bathe. Meanwhile, the biologist continues to study the surrounding fauna, finds several edible plants, and shows them to the others. And still, Katana manages to eat a poisonous berry, but fortunately, her poisoning is not fatal. The news that the girl has recovered has a sobering effect on the passengers. They finally realize that sitting still, they won't survive. People get to work and even make utensils from bamboo. Bank cards turn out to be decent knives. The group of youths brings water from the waterfall, and they prepare a soup from plants. But after dinner, some feel sick and the biologist discovers a couple of poisonous berries in the common pot. Someone remembers seeing Tanaka near the pot, who is not among them. Shirahama sets out to look for him, but stumbles, falls, and loses his torch. After a while, Shirahama returns without Tanaka, but with Hayashima's previously lost barber tools, which he had sorely missed. In the morning, the biologist announces to the people that he is going to look for a river, which should be nearby. His friends go with him. But in the forest, they encounter a stranger who injures the biologist and runs away. The guys carry him back to the train, where fortunately there is a medical student who provides the injured with first aid. The others help as much as they can and pray for the guy. Later, Tanaka unexpectedly returns from the forest. It turns out he worked for a security company and can show how to make traps around the camp. Reni asks Hayashima to fix her hair, and soon there's a queue for the guy. Meanwhile, Shirahama and Katana notice a teenager caught in one of the traps, but the youngster gets out on his own and runs away. The friends hurry after him and soon find themselves by the river, but the boy asks them to wait for him at the spot and disappears into the forest. Hayashima, noticing their disappearance, catches up with the pair. At this time, the teenager returns and leads the friends to carriage number 6, which mysteriously ended up several kilometers away from the 5th carriage. The passengers from the 5th carriage are welcomed by the leader of the group from the 6th carriage, Yumamoto. Their carriage was lucky to be near the river, where there was plenty of fresh water and fish. Moreover, among them was a builder who, under his guidance, they were able to quickly set up a camp and even build a kitchen and a toilet. The newcomers find the one who injured their biologist. He confesses that he did it out of fear, thinking they were going to attack him. He bows deeply, apologizing for his action. And Yumamoto admits that he believes a return to the past is possible. The man told them that in the early days, they found a small boat on the river, where he managed to fix the radio and catch a signal, apparently from Canada, where the year 2060 was mentioned. From what he heard, the man understood that in 2026 a disaster occurred. A huge asteroid fell to Earth, causing powerful earthquakes and tsunamis worldwide, instantly taking billions of lives. The dust thrown into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, leading to the extinction of the remaining species. But the main thing is that the asteroid didn't fall by chance. It was space debris, as besides state corporations, satellites began to be launched by anyone who fancied. One of the probes collided with a satellite, which in turn fell onto an asteroid, leading to a deviation of its orbit. So it was a man-made disaster. That's why it's so important to return to their year and change the future. Inspired by the example of the sixth carriage, the passengers decided to make a bath by the river. Meanwhile, Tanaka continues to deteriorate, making himself a doll from branches and talking to it. In the morning, the bath is ready. For the first time in many days, people bathe in hot water and wash their clothes. And the guys find a strange stone on the riverbank, which Yamamoto learns about. He sends his people to find it, but Rennie notices strangers, and one of the guys lets slip that according to their leader, this stone might help them return home. The girls argue about the need to return, and Rennie pushes Katana away. She falls and accidentally shifts a layer of soil, under which a dead body is discovered. Meanwhile, Tanaka reads in a newspaper an announcement about the search for a murderer in his description. At that time, Rennie and Katana are attacked by guys from the sixth carriage, but Rennie breaks free and runs to her own, where she tells about the found corpse, while Katana escapes from the guys through the forest. The fifth carriage decides to make weapons, while Shirahama and Hayashima run to the neighbors. But the girl is not there, and Katana meanwhile makes it to the boat. Yamamoto is forced to confess to the guys that he killed one of the passengers, who suddenly became aggressive and started attacking people with a knife. That's why he was recognized as a leader. The guys go home, hoping that Katana has returned, but she's not there, and the rest urge to go to the sixth carriage and punish the guilty. And the guys go again to look for the girl. Katana hides in the boat when Yamamoto comes in. He pretends to be calling an unknown station, but the girl sees that the wires are cut. The man discovers her and confesses that he doesn't want to return to the past because he intends to create a new society here. After that, he ties up Katana and locks her in the cabin, where her screams cannot be heard. In the morning, the passengers of the fifth carriage are just about to attack the neighbors when one of the women suggests backing up and looking for a building where they could hide. At this time, guys from the sixth carriage go to the neighbors to scavenge something, but they fall into traps. A fight starts when the rest of the sixth carriage's passengers arrive, and there are more men among them. The fight escalates into a real battle, which is stopped by the appearance of the escaped Katana, who accuses Yamamoto of lying. He is forced to admit to the deception, but he just wanted to keep people's spirits up. However, the passengers decide to exile the former leader. Before leaving, the man hands over a journal from the ship, which contains information about the tower that could help them return to the past. Meanwhile, those who went to search for the building reach the tower and find glowing asteroid fragments there. And in 2023, scientist Ray, after reviewing the video surveillance camera recordings, discovers that a wormhole appeared in the tunnel at the moment of the disappearance of two carriages, which apparently was the result of a distortion in the space-time continuum. The passengers study the journal found by Yamamoto and learn the exact date of the disaster. Moreover, they have an asteroid fragment that possesses a phenomenal magnetic charge. One of the passengers remembers how on the day of their departure, he saw something in the sky resembling a falling star. In the past, Ray, analyzing the same event, concludes that it was the flare from a supernova explosion. In the future, there's also an expert who explains that supernovas occur in space when a star reaches the end of its life cycle and explodes, releasing a massive amount of energy. Apparently, this created the temporal rift into which both carriages fell. It means they need to open this wormhole again. In the evening, a strong storm begins, forcing people to seek more reliable shelter than the carriage. Tanaka opens the rear doors leading into the tunnel. Unexpectedly, a strong gust snatches his doll and sucks it into the wormhole caused by the hurricane. But as soon as the storm subsides, the wormhole disappears. And in 2023, scientists find Tanaka's doll. Passengers in the future conclude that to summon the wormhole, they need a powerful energy source, for which they start looking for remnants of power lines. Digging up each post, the passengers find an electrical substation where, somehow, working equipment is preserved. They redirect enough electricity into the tunnel to stabilize the wormhole with the onset of the next storm, enough to return to the past. The storm starts at night, supported by the power of the substation. The wormhole opens, and everyone enters the carriage except Tanaka, who refused to return. The carriage is swallowed by the hole and races somewhere in space and time until its doors are opened by security service employees who say they have arrived on May 1, 2026, which means there are only a few months left before the asteroid falls. After going through quarantine procedures, the passengers tell the officials, presenting as evidence fragments of the meteorite and unusual plants from the future. Only the officials don't believe the stories about the upcoming apocalypse. Later, the internet buzzes about the incident. The time travelers find fans, which helps maintain interest in the traveler's story about the upcoming end of the world. Meanwhile, scientist Ray becomes convinced that the travelers are telling the truth, as he has also tracked the asteroid. One of the passengers posts an appeal on the internet telling ordinary people about the impending danger, and a passenger who held a high position in the government before the trip makes her way to the Minister of Defense. She listens to her former colleague and reports that the government believed them and is already preparing to launch a missile capable of altering the asteroid's trajectory to pass by Earth. Time passes, and the day of the catastrophe is about to dawn. The travelers decide to gather together on the platform to find out whether it was possible to avert the disaster, and if not, to perish together. But the military successfully completes their task and changes the meteorite's trajectory, saving humanity from total extinction. Quite an unusual series where various theories about the impending doom of humanity are mixed. And the finale of the story is very relevant, emphasizing that life on Earth is the result of the actions of each living being, and the future of the planet is a collective human responsibility. Czech astrophysicist Jakub wakes up in his ship thousands of miles from Earth. His day starts with a call from the flight curator and close friend Peter. Today, the people of Earth want to communicate with the hero. The head of the Czech space program, Tuma, greets the brave pilot as he has been on a solo flight for 189 days already. The thing is, for 4 years, a mysterious cosmic phenomenon, which has been named Chopra's cloud, has been observed from Earth. To study its origin and composition, Jakub was sent to Jupiter. In just a few days, he will be able to take samples, which may help unravel the mysteries of the universe. The captain is asked questions, and suddenly a girl sympathizes with him, as he is the loneliest person in the universe. But Jakub assures her that it is not so. Yes, he is 500 million kilometers away from Earth, but nearly half the distance has been covered and he will soon return home. Moreover, his beloved wife Lenka constantly supports him, with whom he is in direct contact through the latest quantum communication system, which is faster than the speed of light. So Jakub does not suffer from loneliness. TV takes a commercial break where a cheerful Jakub praises the products of a generous sponsor. But the astronaut immediately frowns, and it becomes clear that he is a tired man who has not slept for a long time. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka records a message to her husband, apologizing for leaving him because she is not needed by him. But the flight curator stops the file from being sent and passes it to Tuma. On the ship, Jakub repairs the toilet again, grumbling at Peter, but the latter is more concerned about the malfunctioning cameras. He also notices the astronaut's tired look and advises him to get some sleep. Jakub asks to contact Lenka because she somehow does not respond to his calls, and he promises to find out the reason. The man begins training when Tuma reviews his wife's message. The woman sincerely worries for the family and does not intend to pass this message to Jakub. Lenka is packing her things at this time and does not respond to her husband's messages. Distressed, Jakub drowns his sorrows in sweets and tries to sleep, watching the approaching Chopra's cloud. At night, noises from the malfunctioning toilet keep him from sleeping. He gets up unrested and even more tired, and looking at himself in the mirror, suddenly notices strange movement under his skin and tentacles protrude from his mouth. Jakub is horrified, trying to pull something out of himself, and wakes up. He starts the day on the treadmill, then prepares to equip the apparatus for sample collection. Half of the ship's cameras are out of order, and no one understands why. The thought of Lenka, who still does not make contact, disturbs him. And one day Jakub suddenly hears an unfamiliar voice offering help, but Peter hears nothing of the sort. True, there is a chance that Jakob intercepted the transmission of the Korean mission, which started after the Czech one, but the language was not Korean at all. Later, the friend informs that Lenka went to her mother's, so she will contact her husband when she returns. Jakob calms down a bit and continues his work. He inspects the compartments and suddenly sees a huge hairy spider in one of them. He closes the doors to the compartment and contacts Peter. But precisely in this part of the station, the camera has long been broken and he can see nothing. Jakob opens the doors, but the spider has not gone anywhere. Moreover, it starts a conversation, stating that it did not intend to scare the human. Then the astronaut locks himself in the airlock and informs Peter that he wants to decontaminate the ship. He gets into a spacesuit, says the password that triggers the system, and the surrounding space is filled with disinfecting foam, the color of which reminds him of a summer morning in the field where he and Lenka walked. But then the cleaning is over and Jakob emerges from the airlock. However, the spider hasn't gone anywhere. It informs him that the strange bath arranged for it by the human did not harm it and suggests removing the spacesuit. It is not dangerous. Jakob reaches out to it, but the spider dodges. Such is not the custom in its tribe, so it's better for the human not to do this. It is an explorer too who accidentally found Earth. It studied life on the planet for 3,158 years and even learned Earth's languages, but never understood the essence of the human soul. And when it met Jakob, it felt his loneliness and came here. Unable to accept what was happening, the astronaut hides in the sleeping compartment, but he immediately starts to vividly see and hear his wife. Jakob moves to the station's room, where Lenka appears before him again. It turns out the spider is broadcasting the human's memories because it is very interested in these strange feelings. And it wants to help him overcome emotional difficulties since his companion is leaving. Jakob tries to refuse the help, but the spider does not believe him. Meanwhile, on Earth, Lenka arrives at her mother's because she is pregnant and cannot be alone. Nearby is a boarding house where pregnant women live together, and she decides to stay there for a while. The mother does not understand her, as one cannot leave her husband right now. At the station, the spider asks the astronaut to give it some of his food, and he treats it to nut paste, the taste of which reminds it of its lost home. Its planet was destroyed by an enemy attack, and it fled and wandered through space for a long time. At this time on Earth, Tuma goes to Lenka. The woman is convinced that the wife cannot leave her husband right now. After all, she knew he was a very peculiar person. These qualities help him stay alone for many days, but Lenka is pregnant and suffers from loneliness. The spider tells the astronaut that Chopra's cloud consists of particles that contain wisdom. It cannot say how old it is, but everything has a beginning and an end, even the universe. The spider shows Jakob his first date with Lenka when she suggested they always follow each other, and he agreed. And he does not understand why make promises that you cannot keep, but Jakob has no answer. Later, he asks the spider to save some nut paste, and it reluctantly gives back the can. At this time on Earth, Lenka confesses to her mother that, although it is hard to raise a child alone, she is ready for it. And she will tell her daughter that she loved her father very much at first, but was mistaken. And at the station, Jakob suddenly wonders about the spider's name and suggests naming the creature Hanus. His father told him about a master who lived in ancient times, who created astronomical clocks, for which the king ordered him to be blinded. The spider agrees to accept this name. Later, the astronaut plays music from the opera Mermaid and explains what it is. The spider immediately demonstrates his date with his wife when she appeared before him in a Naiad costume, but the man does not want to remember this. At night, Jakob again has nightmares, this time related to his father, who was a communist and died because of his beliefs. But the spider comforts its friend. There is no need to worry about the past, as the universe is as it should be. Later, Hannes watches in surprise as Jakob exercises, and Jakob explains that humans must do this in space, otherwise their limbs could fail. Hanus doesn't understand why leave the home planet then. At this time, Tuma visits Lenka. The woman tries to reach out to the wife's feelings, but she does not want to return to the past. Then the head says she will not pass her message, and the whole point of the silence surrounding their talks is that inside they are together. Meanwhile, there are only 45 hours left to reach the cloud. And then Lenka's voice spreads through the station. Jakob rushes to the transmitter and sees his wife's face on the screen. They talk about the past and the future when he sees a glowing particle in front of him, which Hannes calls the beginning. Jakob tries to catch it in a jar, but the particle freely passes through all surfaces. Suddenly the ship loses all communication, and then Chopra's particles start swirling everywhere. Hannes calms the human. The beginning will not harm him, so there is no need to fear. It is a regular repository that cannot be described in human language. And then it asks why the arrival of a child so upsets Lenka. Because her feelings smell of fear. Jakob explains that they lost their first child, and he was not there then, nor now. For what? The spider shows Jakob their conversation when he promised to be there, but he lied to his wife, and she stopped believing him. Later, Jakob finally gets through to Peter on the quantum phone, but Hannes again turns on the man's memories, where he and his wife discuss his journey. He was so confident that he didn't even try to understand his wife. The spider realized that Jakob is selfish, and he is to blame for his loneliness. So it lost interest in him and wants to leave. This causes a panic attack in the astronaut, who no longer wants to be alone. Jakob tries to grab the spider, but it itself presses the man's body to the bulkhead and reminds him that it preferred to communicate without touching. The spider lets the human go and flies to the other end of the station. Jakob desperately follows it, promising to change, and again sees Lenka in the guise of a naiad. He floats in zero gravity, remembering his wife and crying from the sense of realizing the loss. Then he calls Peter and asks him to visit the woman. The friend goes to the boarding house and hands her the quantum phone. Jakob talks about how he loves her and asks for forgiveness for his selfishness. Now he doesn't understand why he neglected the most precious. He wasted his life on nonsense and is not worthy of her. Immediately after the conversation, he hears Hannes's voice again, asking him to rest because he has atoned for his guilt. Jakob asks not to leave him, and the spider admits that it too fears loneliness. But suddenly the man notices that the spider is not feeling well, and it admits that although it escaped from the enemy, it was already too late. They had taken over his body, and suddenly it hugs the astronaut. For the first time in a long time, Jakob falls asleep deeply, and the spider has to wake him up because a great discovery awaits him. It even brings him a tube of hot coffee to bed, after which the astronaut makes the final preparations. He contacts the Czech Space Authority and reports that his mission is dedicated to all the people of Earth, but especially to Lenka. Afterward, he reduces speed and begins collecting samples using special equipment. But then the spider becomes very ill. Jakob abandons his task and tries to help his friend. The equipment gives an error, and Earth commands to cancel the sample collection. But Jakob hears nothing because he sees Hannes in open space. The ship's systems fail one after another, and the control center orders to end the mission and return. But Jakob puts on a spacesuit, takes a bomb, and goes outside. Peter can't understand what's happening and pleads with his friend to return to the ship. However, using the explosion to catch up with the spider, Jakob holds it. Hannes thanks him, but it's all in vain. Soon the enemies will consume him. And Jakob, looking at the surrounding space, remembers the day he almost drowned. Then his father saved him, and now he forgives all his father's sins, and forgives himself. Hannes pulls him to the center of the cloud, where everything is gathered, the beginning and the end, the fluctuation of all times, his past and future, him, his Lenka, and his father. Every promise and punishment, everything is unchangeable and impermanent, but such is the truth of nature. The universe is as it should be. Before the man, Lenka appears again, and Jakob admits that their meeting is a miracle. Just like the meeting with the spider. Jakob hands his friend a can of nut paste he saved for him. The latter thanks him and asks to listen to the silence, after which it disintegrates into millions of particles, consumed by worm-like creatures that destroyed his race. And Lenka on Earth suddenly sees a glowing purple particle in the grass. Night turns into day. Jakob in a spacesuit wades through a transparent stream, above which, on a log, sits Lenka in a mermaid costume asking him to kiss her. Her face becomes the last thing he sees, at least for a moment, because at that time, he sees the lights of a South Korean ship which saves Jakob. Later, he calls his wife Lenka, apologizes, and confesses that if he had known everything earlier, he would never have left, and she would kiss him once more. A fantastic, yet lifelike film. A work-absorbed astronaut had to be millions of kilometers away from his wife and hear a sermon from an extraterrestrial being to understand that family is the most important thing in his life, and one can only hope that he will manage to regain his sense of purpose. In 2025, aliens occupy Earth and first enclose cities with 300-meter walls to limit human movement. Welcome to day 348 of our occupation. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. One day, truck driver Will bids farewell to his wife Katie and their children, Grace and Bram, and drives to work through the streets of Los Angeles, patrolled by soldiers in red helmets. Later, from his conversation with a colleague, it becomes clear that Will is planning an illegal trip beyond the wall. He reaches a smuggler who places him in a metal box and covers it with ice. That's when Will discovers he has a fellow passenger, to whom he reveals he's looking for his 12-year-old son left behind the wall. Soon the vehicle enters through the gates, then an explosion occurs, flipping the truck over. Dazed, Will crawls out only to be captured by the red helmets. That same morning, Katie goes to an underground dealer for forbidden insulin. By restricting medicine, the invaders weed out the weak, making it very hard to obtain. She presents a bottle of alcohol for trade, but finds the insulin spoiled. She has to fight her way out with a pistol, risking drone detection and death for all. But Katie can't afford to be robbed. Meanwhile, Will is imprisoned, unable to call his wife. Katie is indeed worried, as walking the streets at night is prohibited. Then her sister Maddie arrives with her son, who needs the insulin. Katie assures she will find the medication and asks to stay with the children. She goes to her husband's colleague, who lies about not knowing Will's whereabouts. Katie has to return home empty-handed. Suddenly an alarm blares over the city. Katie hides under a military truck parked at the curb. A drone hovers above just as a prisoner is shoved into the vehicle. Just when Katie seems doomed, the truck starts moving and the drone flies away. The woman makes it home. In the morning, she visits her friend Broussard and reports Will's disappearance. It turns out he, like her husband, was with the FBI before the aliens arrived. He asked her to return home while he checks his remaining contacts, but Katie goes to the hospital, where she learns of the explosion at the city's entrance. Amidst the chaos, she sneaks into a storeroom and steals several vials of insulin. In prison, Will hears his cellmate's confessions, soon to be sent to work at a factory for the aliens. Then soldiers arrive, one shouting Will's real surname. He's recognized and taken to the Green Zone, where the world's leaders now reside. There, he's met by Snyder, a representative of the Los Angeles governor. Snyder knows Will's military and FBI background and his knack for catching dangerous criminals. Since the military and police vanished after the aliens' arrival, Will had to hide, but now Snyder needs his help, offering his family full protection in return. The Masters demand security, so Will lead a special unit, infiltrate the rebels, and capture their leader Geronimo. As the alien spacecraft is about to launch, Snyder takes Will to the balcony, hoping to persuade him to switch sides. If he refuses, his family will be sent to the factory. At night, the red helmets bring Will home, frightening his family, but he reassures them, explaining he was just in an accident. However, Katie realizes her husband is lying. Hearing he went to look for Charlie, she cries, but the news of Snyder's proposal enrages her. She would never become the wife of a traitor. In the morning, the family is woken up by the smell of bacon, and upon entering the kitchen, they find Snyder there. He has prepared breakfast and even brewed coffee, which is now impossible to find. As he eats, he lists all the benefits of their new status: security, a personal tutor for the children, good food and work. Moreover, the aliens allow the couple to reopen their old bar. However, Will is only willing to agree in exchange for the return of his son, who is in another block. Snyder promises to consider this option. The next morning, Katie arrives at an unassuming house where members of the resistance, whom she informs that the occupiers have hired her husband to find them, await her. The following morning, Will goes to work, quickly realizing that Snyder deceived him. Instead of becoming the commander of a special unit, he is subordinated to Phyllis, who assigns him to find the guy who planted an explosive device at the city entrance. He is partnered with Beau, an old policeman. Meanwhile, Katie arrives at her bar and finds her lost son's belongings. Broussard interrupts her cleaning, wanting to know what the police have found out about the explosion at the customs, but Will has just started his job and has no information yet. Meanwhile, Will and Beau approach the house where the girlfriend of the wanted criminal lives, and by deception, they force him to run out the back door. The agent catches up with him when suddenly a drone appears. Will fearlessly looks directly into the lens and it instantly disappears. The police bring the detainee to the station, where Will's arrested colleague is found. The man begs Phyllis to release him as his informant, but she refuses. Then Will goes to his trailer, but his family is no longer there because the woman and child are entering his house at that moment. After hiding the mother and son upstairs, Katie drives to Broussard as the couple needs new documents, but he refuses to help, as the resistance cannot take risks. Katie leaves. At home she confronts Will, who, learning that his friend's family is with him, takes them to a man who makes fake documents. On their way, they are stopped by the Red Helmets. However, after checking the pass, they let him go with apologies, leaving Katie in a state of shock. They safely arrive at the Masters, and while he makes the documents, Will tells Katie that he caught the guy who planted the bomb. And once he finds Geronimo, they will be able to bring Charlie back. Later, Will takes the woman and child to a camp where displaced people live. Katie meets with the resistance leader. Alexander calms her down, as the caught boy belongs to another group, but he promises to warn them. At the station, Will discovers that a group of prisoners is being prepared for shipment to the factory. Phyllis asks him to resign himself. During the arrival, the city's entire defense was destroyed in 8 hours. What can a bunch of rebels do? At night, Katie comforts her distraught husband when he is informed that the suspect has divulged the location of his accomplice's hideout. He leaves, and Katie rushes to the phone to warn Broussard. Meanwhile, the prisoners are brought to the location, forced to strip, disinfected, and then redressed. At the same time, the Red Helmets arrive at the location named by the detainee and find only the bodies of rebels. Will realizes that there is a spy among the police. The next morning, a man with a card enters an inconspicuous house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Immediately, a radio broadcast begins with calls to overthrow the occupation, voiced by Geronimo. The Red Helmets detect the transmission and head to the location. At the same time, Bram duplicates the broadcast recording and hides the cassettes under the bed, but the military, storming into the house, find no one there. That same day, Katie participates in a resistance armed attack on a food truck for the first time. During the operation, one of their comrades, Kim, is fatally wounded. Katie tries to help him, but Broussard finishes the boy off, shocking Katie. Then, drones arrive and start shooting random passers-by. However, Broussard calculates the authorities' response time to the incident. After the operation, Katie rushes home and barely manages to wash off the blood traces. She is so shaken that she doesn't want to explain anything and locks herself in her room. That day at school, Bram gives a cassette to his teacher, who notices a change in the pattern of the alien ship's takeoffs. He saw a very large object circling Earth in the sky and now intends to make a more powerful telescope. The police arrive at the scene of the incident. Will notices the body of a boy who was clearly finished off. Phyllis orders to take his photo and quickly learns his name. After that, the Red Helmets go to his house and arrest his parents. Will is outraged by this and fails to notice Broussard in the crowd, who heads to the resistance base and reports what happened. But Alexander is confident that Kim left no traces. Will then goes home, where Katie explains her morning behavior with the things found in the bar belonging to their son. Distraught, Will blames himself for being powerless against the Masters, but his wife promises her support. Later, Katie goes to meet Broussard. He justifies his actions as saving Kim from torture, but now she needs to extract everything her husband learned during the investigation from him. At the same time, Bram's friend asks for his help and leads the boy to an underground tunnel beneath the wall, where her brother slipped and injured his leg. It turns out their father worked there before the arrival, and now they use the tunnel to get beyond the wall. Will and Bo go to a cultural center, listed among the places visited by the deceased Kim, and find a rebel weapons cache. At the same time, Bram's friends tell him they've been going to the other side for 6 months to get food, as there's no one beyond the wall. Alexander learns about the lost weapons and asks Broussard to warn Katie about the inadmissibility of her husband's actions. He fulfills this request, but Katie is more concerned about her family's safety. Nevertheless, in the evening, she opens the bar to visitors. Suddenly, in the midst of the festivities, Snyder walks in. The man congratulates everyone on the opening of the establishment and then explains to Will that by revitalizing such places, the Masters allow people to safely release tension. Hearing this, Katie becomes furious, thinking they've sold out to the aliens for the sake of getting their son back. But Will is convinced that by continuing to work for Snyder, he will be able to find Charlie. Later, he speaks with Bo again about the spy. However, the former policeman, who has faced betrayal, doesn't believe in such a possibility. Meanwhile, Katie tells Broussard that the quick finding of the Resistance's premises is explained by a huge database in a woman who knows how to use it. She's ready to reveal her name if Will remains unharmed. Broussard swears to this. The next day, a squad of red helmets bursts into the school. The military brutally arrest a teacher and beat a student. Returning to the base, one of them removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Broussard. Later, he explains to Alexander that he learned the duty schedule of the red helmets. Now they have a chance to be in the right place at the right time. That same day, Phyllis shows Will information about the Los Angeles rebels. If they unite and go on the offensive, the entire block will be cleaned out. She hopes Will understands what this means for him and his family and counts on his loyalty. Meanwhile, Katie takes the children for a walk with Lindsay, the governess appointed by the authorities, and turns on the streetlight, sending a prearranged signal. The sound of breaking glass is heard. The woman counts to 10, then pulls out a fire extinguisher. Only after extinguishing the fire does she call emergency services. The red helmets and Will arrive. He is outraged to find that his house is being searched, but such is the protocol. Katie is asked to go to Phyllis for interrogation. She promises the family enhanced security. Moreover, the neighbors are warned that if something happens to them, they will be held responsible. Katie is shocked, as now they will be feared. Phyllis interrogates her about everything, even the personal relationship between husband and wife. Meanwhile, Maddie goes to the Commission for the Preservation of Cultural and Artistic Items in search of work and introduces herself to Charlotte, the director, hoping to become her assistant. After his wife's interrogation, Will confronts Phyllis, but she shows him tapes found under Bram's bed and advises him to keep a closer eye on his son. For now, she'll hold on to these pieces of evidence. Furious, Will drives home, and after a tough conversation, Bram shows his father posters. Their appearance in the city signals the release of a new broadcast by Geronimo. Katie manages to extract a promise from Alexander not to touch her husband, and in return identifies her husband's boss, Phyllis, in a photo. Later, another broadcast by Geronimo begins in the city. This time, the police immediately detect the signal coming from the library and rush there. The man hears their approach but utters his final words, calling for resistance. He is arrested, although Will is sure it's not Geronimo, greatly disappointing Snyder, who had already informed the masters of their victory. That same day, Maddie witnesses Charlotte's anger, who needs a painting by a specific artist. Maddie reports she knows who had collections in the city, as she worked as an art historian. Meanwhile, the arrested man confesses during interrogation that he found the text for the broadcast in a pipe. The police go to the site and verify that the indicated pipe leads to the green zone. Charlotte's workers find art items in the house Maddie mentioned. In gratitude, the owner takes her on board and promises to help with insulin. That same day, Phyllis informs Will that as a sign of trust, she destroyed the tapes. The man goes home where Bram admits he listened to Geronimo because he was the only one who instilled hope in people. Katie arrives at the bar earlier than usual and finds Phyllis in the hall, who wants to talk to her alone. Phyllis talks about her husband and draws parallels with Will, who loves his wife so much that he doesn't see who she really is. She shows surveillance photos from the truck attack site and warns Katie that she's gotten involved with the wrong people. If Katie wants to survive, she will now work for her. After the conversation, Phyllis returns home, where her paralyzed husband lies. She greets him, but upon entering the living room, she finds Broussard there. Phyllis immediately understands why he came and asks him to kill her husband too. Broussard shoots. The next day, Bo and Will go to the crime scene and find the word Geronimo written on the wall. Snyder is furious because Phyllis was very close to the masters and demands the criminal be found. A message comes in about the capture of one of the Geronimo group. Will interrogates the young man, who gives an address in the green zone. The red helmets burst in there, finding a concealed room and several people who call themselves the Geronimo group. Meanwhile, Bram, accompanied by his girlfriend, passes under the wall and ends up in a deserted city where they find necessary supplies in a huge warehouse. Back in Los Angeles, news is broadcast that the underground has been eliminated, although Will doesn't believe it. Snyder once again becomes enraged because he sees that the captured couple doesn't look like terrorists. He refuses to fulfill the agreement about searching for Charlie and appoints Will as the head of the group. Will immediately begins searching for the mole, and Phyllis's assistant, Jennifer, reminds him of his wife, suggesting he might be the source of the leak. Returning home, Will sees Bram giving his sister markers brought from beyond the wall, but the son lies that he traded them for oranges. Snyder interrogates a man who claimed to be Geronimo, but he confesses that he is just an actor. Snyder convinces him to play out his role in exchange for being sent to another block. At the same time, Bram rushes to his teacher and promises to get him a powerful lens for his telescope. Will, secretly from his wife, searches the bar but finds nothing incriminating except for a book he doesn't recognize. The trial of Geronimo is broadcast on all channels, featuring relatives of the terrorism victims, and a scaffold for execution is erected in the square. The actor plays his role, believing Snyder's promises to eradicate terrorism. He realizes he's been deceived only when he finds himself on the scaffold, but can do nothing about it. Immediately after the execution, Snyder invites Will to join him, promising to show him something unusual. At the same time, Alexander's group prepares for a new attack, with Katie among the rebels. On the way, Will expresses his outrage to Snyder, who achieved nothing by executing the actor, but Snyder reminds him of the need to pacify the population and that he's bought time to search for the real Geronimo. Snyder's car moves through the city, guarded by a group of red helmets, including Broussard. At one of the turns, a decoy road worker sends them on a detour, and when the convoy slows down, Broussard shoots his colleagues. Snyder tries to run, but Will locks the doors as the car is armored. Rebels, disguised in red helmets uniforms, shoot at the car and manage to pull the door off, but Will shoots from inside and still gets Snyder out of the fire. Drones appear, but the rebels manage to escape. Will leads Snyder into the bar where Katie arrives at the same time. Snyder is hysterical, but Will cannot guarantee protection by his own means. Katie asks Will in private not to risk himself for such a worthless person, but Will cannot leave a person without help. Realizing that the phone doesn't work, he goes outside to a payphone to call for backup. Meanwhile, Alexander, learning about Will's role in saving Snyder, is furious, but then Katie communicates via radio that the traitor is in the bar. She returns to Snyder and keeps the conversation going to lower his guard. He boasts about being a professor of economics, which earned him a high position. He mentions there are 7 more colonies, but he doesn't know what happens beyond them. Will returns, announcing that he has managed to call for reinforcement and it's on its way. Katie bandages Will's wound, and he confesses that Geronimo is a collective image, not one person. Katie asks not to interfere with Snyder's killing, but Will reminds her that another will take his place. Then, Snyder reveals that his people have found their son, and he is currently negotiating Charlie's return. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. They hide Snyder in the bathroom. Broussard enters in a red helmet's uniform and searches the place. Katie leads him to the basement, asking to ensure Will's safety, but he can't guarantee anything as her husband is always diving into the fray. Broussard eventually leaves, but Will is sure he is a member of the resistance and will return with backup. They barricade the doors with Snyder, who again mentions Charlie, infuriating Katie as she's tired of his blackmail. Meanwhile, the rebels try to break into the bar, but fail. A frightened Snyder tells Will that the masters have tested virtually every person, thus filtering out those they don't need, but he has never seen the aliens himself. As the rebels continue to press, Will orders Katie to hide, readying himself to defend Snyder. Then a smoke grenade is thrown in, and the militants storm in. Will opens fire. When one of the rebels finds Will, Katie shoots him, but Broussard aims at her, and her husband forces her to drop the weapon. The rebel herds them into the basement and leaves. However, Will finds a machine gun and chases after him, but by the time he gets upstairs, everyone is gone. Then, the real red helmets arrive and pull Snyder from the closet where Will had hidden him. In the evening, Will tries to reassure Katie, explaining that Snyder's tribunal was just a farce. There is no people's hero, and those who attacked them have no relation to Geronimo. Meanwhile, Alexander concludes that Katie is a double agent, simply leading them on. Meanwhile, Maddie starts a relationship with Charlotte's husband, Nolan, who is the leader of the New Age preacher church. At the same time, Will identifies Broussard by photo, having seen him among the attackers, and receives an order to find and arrest him. The red helmets head to his address, but when they begin to storm the house, it explodes. Will questions Broussard's squad mates, and one mentions a distinctive feature, a tattoo on the chest, which Will recognizes as a Special Forces sign. Broussard infiltrates a restricted area, where he steals the corpse of a dark-skinned man of similar age and build. Along with Alexander, they place it in a car and burn it. Throughout, the leader convinces Broussard of Katie's betrayal. Later, the police find a burnt car with a charred body inside, matching the description of the bar attacker, but Will once again doubts everything. Katie tries to contact the underground, but can't manage to do so. Finally, she finds an encrypted message with the name of a meeting place, where a car with Broussard at the wheel awaits her. Meanwhile, Will's assistant Jennifer finds in the database 14 people with Broussard's face, and he realizes that Broussard is not just a military man, but a former FBI agent. Broussard takes Kate out of the city and asks her difficult questions, as she shot one of her own, but Katie reminds him that she laid out one main condition from the start: her family must be untouchable. She joined the fight and served the cause faithfully. He doubts her loyalty. She leaves, unwilling to continue the conversation. Broussard goes to one of the resistance members, Rachel, and tells her about Alexander's order to eliminate Katie and how he couldn't go through with it. Will arrives at Snyder's in the Green Zone and reports that Broussard is called something entirely different, and he's very skilled in his field, but he'll definitely find him. In response, Snyder gives him an envelope containing a recent photo of Charlie. Will brings it to Katie, and through tears she asks her husband to rid themselves of Snyder's control. He promises to do so when he is ready. Meanwhile, Charlotte learns about Maddie and Nolan's relationship and threatens to fire her. Nolan decides to remind his wife of her place and offers Maddie to become his assistant. The police receive new information, with which Will goes home. He shows his wife a photo of Broussard and tells her that his fingerprints were found in their bar. This means he was there before. Katie says she doesn't know him, but Will shows her photos of his victims, and she recalls that he indeed visited them and said he lived in his mother's house and was fixing it. Jennifer immediately finds Broussard's mother's house through receipts from construction stores. Rachel comes to Katie, confessing that Broussard indeed killed many, but it's part of the resistance. Katie reminds her that she almost became one of his victims, but Rachel reminds her that Broussard didn't carry out that order. Then Katie calls Broussard and warns him that Will has figured him out. The red helmets go to Broussard's mother's house, but it's empty. The abandoned tools make it clear he received a warning. Will calls out to a neighbor who turns out to be Alexander, and he says he hasn't seen his neighbor. Will leaves but then stops. On Broussard's table lies the same book as in his wife's bar. Will's partner ends up at a factory where people often get sick and die. It turns out the factories are built on the moon. Will shows his children a photo of Charlie and admits he only started working for the government to get him back. That morning, the governor of the Los Angeles block arrives at Snyder's to inform him that the chief minister of the Pacific region is coming for an inspection. He assures everything is going well, but the woman is very doubtful. Katie goes to Rachel and learns that her underage sons are also in the resistance. She is stunned by the woman's courage, but still announces her departure from the group, fearing for her family. Rachel promises her support. Alexander calls Will and declares that his wife is the mole leaking information to the rebels. He sets up a meeting place. Will goes there. He immediately recognizes Broussard's neighbor, who confesses that he is the head of the cell and is willing to betray everyone for the right to leave the block. Meanwhile, Broussard meets with the leader of the youth cell of the rebels, from whom he receives information about the arrival of an important person. Will returns to Beau and tells him everything. Later, he goes to Snyder and conveys Alexander's conditions. Snyder demands a personal meeting. In the evening, Katie returns to the topic of Charlie. If Snyder knows where he is, why can't he bring him back? But the conversation shifts to the meeting with Alexander. He reveals he is ready to betray the entire cell, and Katie immediately leaves for the bar, signaling Broussard along the way. Bram and his teacher observe the moon and notice changes in its surface. It seems that's where the alien mines and warehouses are located. That evening, Broussard comes to the bar, where Katie tells him about the leader's betrayal. He immediately goes to Alexander and starts asking questions, but Alexander demands he stop all communication with Katie and prepares for a new operation. The next day, Will takes Snyder to the meeting place with Alexander, who confesses he just wants to survive. He needs a universal pass to travel between blocks. In exchange, he gives a list of the group led by Broussard and admits they are planning an operation to eliminate the minister. He will set up a meeting for Broussard where the police will arrest him. Afterward, Will take him beyond the wall and give him the pass. Later, Broussard arrives at the designated place in the market. Rachel and Katie are also there, and upon spotting the red helmets, Katie immediately warns Broussard. A rebel throws firecrackers, causing panic, and people scatter as the military opens fire. Rachel dies, and Broussard escapes. Will goes to Alexander's house, which is under police guard, and announces the cancellation of the deal with Snyder. He is ready to let him run, but Snyder starts talking about Katie signing his death warrant. Will shoots the traitor and blames it all on Broussard. At night, people see Rachel's hanged family, and Katie promises Broussard her support. Will lets his wife know he's aware of her participation in the resistance. The following night, a spontaneous uprising occurs during which several red helmets die. Bo asserts that people's patience has run out. Will informs Snyder that he has information about a new rebel cell located beyond the wall. Apparently, there exists an unknown passage to the authorities. He asks for permission to let them go beyond the wall and check. Snyder agrees but assigns them a guard. Meanwhile, Broussard and Katie go to the leader of the youth cell, who proposed a joint attack on the minister. Everything is to happen in the subway, now used only by the masters. Will and Bo, having gone beyond the wall, climb a skyscraper and survey the entire city. They then simulate an attack on themselves. While their guard tries to figure out what happened, their commander finds a map supposedly lost by the attackers. Later, Will points out to Snyder the marks on the map, indicating the rebels' attack points. Snyder reports the found tunnel under the wall. Members of the youth cell show Katie a micro-drone, shaped like a bee, capable of flying anywhere and gathering any information. The rebels finalize the attack plan. Broussard teaches Katie how to shoot. At that time, red helmets led by Snyder come to Nolan's house, accusing Charlotte of hiding valuable paintings from the masters and arresting her. That evening, Katie finds a book about the benefit of the arrival, given to her daughter by Lindsay. She immediately calls Will and tells him about how the new church is indoctrinating children. Will then informs her that they will move to Bo's house, located beyond the wall, accusing her of spying on him, but Katie can no longer bear it. They constantly lie to each other, and it's killing their family, and hiding, even beyond the wall, is impossible. Will asks Bo to run alone. Katie and Broussard, killing guards, descend into the subway, open a backup entrance, and the group infiltrates inside. The rebels cause an explosion, derailing the train. Searching the wrecked wagons, people find an alien's body. Will learns about this and heads to the station, where the governor soon arrives, announcing the kidnapping of a master. There was already an incident when 2 aliens died, leading to Dallas's destruction, so people must understand what awaits Los Angeles if they don't find the missing master. At the same time, a group of rebels transports the alien to a secret location, blocking signals with metallic foil. Will rushes home and asks Maddie to hide the children. She suggests taking them to the green zone. He tries to find Katie, and Bram gives him a secret number his mother received the day before. While the rebels try to move the alien to another location, a curfew is declared in the middle of the day. Maddie and the children end up in a huge queue, and as they try to break through, Bram runs away. Meanwhile, the rebels hijack a red helmet's car and load the alien into it. At the same time, the police receive subway camera footage. Will recognizes Katie but doesn't show it. Bram runs to his teacher and leads him to the tunnel. Meanwhile, the group that kidnapped the alien moves through the city in a police car and witnesses a house being shot to intimidate residents. Snyder is removed from his position, but the governor can do nothing. Meanwhile, the alien is brought to a laboratory, shielded from any observation methods, and they attempt to open his suit. Will gives the rebel codebook to Jennifer. Together, they review the operation footage from Broussard's arrest attempt and identify the youth cell leader, who is also in the database. The rebels figure out how to activate the communicator on the alien's wrist when Will knocks on the door. He asks to hand over the kidnapped and run, or he won't be able to save them, but Katie refuses to open the door, instead breaking the isolation, forcing the rebels to flee through a secret passage. At that moment, drones converge on the house. Katie opens the door, and Will calls the police. The alien is taken away. Snyder thanks him and gives him a universal pass beyond the wall. Simultaneously, Bram and the teacher descend into the tunnel and are caught by the police. Snyder is taken away by the patrol. Will goes beyond the wall to find his son, and Katie returns to an empty house. This concludes the first season. It all begins in a desert, where a lone child stumbles along, gnawing on a human finger, searching for his mother. A few miles away, a car drives down a road that abruptly ends in the middle of the desert. The man driving the car steps out and continues on foot. Wyndham is a photographer who came here to capture the solar eclipse. After taking a few photos and noticing that the day is coming to an end, he tries to return to his car but unexpectedly encounters a boy who seems lost and frightened. Wyndham is ready to help, but the boy doesn't seem to want it. He points in the direction where he lost his parents and walks away. Trying to help the boy find his way home, Wyndham follows him, but the boy rudely refuses his support and leaves. The man is left alone in the darkness, with no way to return to civilization. Wyndham lies down to sleep on the ground, but struggles to do so, reliving the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds. He follows the noise and soon finds stakes with ropes strung between them, from which hang bottles that produce a melodious chime in the desert. Before him is a large canyon, at the bottom of which stands a wooden house, around which a woman is wandering, singing a song. Wyndham asks for help, but she enters the house, as if not hearing his pleas. He finds an iron ladder leading down and begins to descend. However, the ladder only reaches halfway down the canyon, and from there, it's just an ordinary rope ladder. Wyndham overcomes both and approaches the house. He knocks persistently at the door, but receives no answer. So, Wyndham opens the door himself and enters. The woman, standing at the stove, greets him calmly, as if she had been expecting his arrival. She offers him dinner, and although he refuses, she serves him some soup and places it before him on the table. Wyndham is grateful for her hospitality, but continues to ask questions about how to leave this strange place. He tells her about the boy he met and asks for water. The woman, named Alina, suggests that he rest until morning, and Wyndham gratefully accepts her care. He lies down in the bed she points out, observing as Alina tidies herself and notes that she is young and beautiful. The next morning, he gathers his things and heads outside, hoping to find a way home. But strangely, he cannot find the rope ladder he descended the previous day. Without it, reaching the iron section is impossible. Wyndham returns to the house and, taking out his camera, takes pictures of the surroundings and the drawings on the canyon walls. Everything is quite gloomy and reminds him of death in all its forms. He then notices Alina, who is busy repairing the roof, and asks her about the missing ladder, but she either does not understand what he is talking about or pretends not to. Although her words imply that there are other residents here, she does not tell him anything directly. Disappointed, Wyndham walks around the canyon, periodically calling for help, but to no avail. Later, Alina asks him to undress so she can wash his clothes, saying it wouldn't be proper to return home so dirty. The man has no choice but to comply. That night, he struggles to sleep again, goes outside, and once again tries to find a way out, but there is none. In the morning, he searches the house and, finding a hammer, tries to climb the canyon wall. Suddenly, he notices a movement above, and then a chicken carcass falls down, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Wyndham regains consciousness in the darkness. His leg is injured by his own hammer, and he cries out in pain. Alina rushes to help him, but she does not answer his questions about the children he saw on the cliff. For several days, he drifts in and out of fever, unable to distinguish between night and day, unsure if he is truly seeing children around him. But the day of recovery comes. Limping, Wyndham makes his way outside. He demands that Alina tell the children above to pull him out of there, but she pretends not to understand him. She offers him to stay, promising to take care of him and ensure his well-being. But Wyndham doesn't need this. He wants to return home, to his work. He rudely pushes Alina away, rejecting any help. The man examines his leg and realizes that it will be a long time before he can use it fully. Suddenly, he hears voices from above and looks up to see the boy holding a little girl by the hand. The pair cheerfully ask how they can help, and upon learning that Wyndham wants to climb up, the boy promises to bring ropes and pull him out with his winch. But before leaving, he asks a rather strange question about Wyndham's favorite color. Wyndham replies that it's red and begs them to hurry. The boy and girl leave, and Wyndham checks his wallet in his pocket, not intending to return for his other belongings. Suddenly, a rope falls from above, and the same boy advises him to tie himself tightly, which Wyndham does. They begin to pull him up, and the man is already anticipating his rescue, but about halfway up, the rope stops. Dangling over the canyon, Wyndham screams, then tries to climb the rope himself, but lacks the strength and ends up hanging helplessly under the merciless sun. He regains consciousness from moisture, but when he looks up, he sees the boy spraying him with a hose, mocking the helpless man. Several other children appear on the cliff, ranging from very young to older teens. They are all dressed in clothes obviously taken from other people and behave inappropriately. Taunting Wyndham, they start swinging the rope, causing him to crash into the canyon walls, instinctively calling out for help from Alina. He sees the woman shouting angrily at the foolish children and loses consciousness after another blow to the wall. That night, he wakes up in bed and immediately tries to get up. Alina doesn't understand where he is headed, but Wyndham is willing to do anything to escape. The woman explains that the children are homeless, gathered in the desert together, surviving as best they can. Neither of them notices that while they talk, the children stand on the cliff, watching the house's windows burn. The next day, Wyndham watches as Alina releases a bird, envying its ability to fly. The woman brings him a spare set of clothes from somewhere, and although he didn't ask for them, he is touched by her care. Time passes. One day, Wyndham plants a small garden at the bottom of the canyon. Occasionally, the children bring them various items, food and drinks, which surprises Wyndham since there are no stores around. He doesn't understand their behavior. First, they feed him, then they mock him, but Alina accepts it all as normal. The man becomes more involved in the household, marveling at Alina's quiet demeanor. One night, he tries to ask her questions, which are interrupted by cries from the yard. Alina advises Wyndham not to go outside when the children behave like that, but he rushes out into the night and sees the boys, dressed in outlandish clothes, gathered around the house. They start taunting him, pushing and beating him, but suddenly disappear into the night. Wyndham demands answers from Alina. Who are these children? Why do they live here? And why does she stay in this horrible place? But the woman remains calm, not admitting that she is a prisoner. That evening, she comes to Wyndham. The man, starved for female attention, eagerly welcomes her. Time passes, and the first sprouts appear in Wyndham's garden. One day, the boy in the cap calls to him from above. He is friendly and promises to bring some soda. Wyndham returns to his plants and unexpectedly finds a wedding ring and car keys buried in the sand. That evening, Alina shows him a portrait of a woman. Calling her the first mother, she confesses that she is expecting his child. Stunned, Wyndham can't believe his ears. He never wanted to have children here, especially with a woman he barely knows. He yells at Alina, but he has no choice but to accept it. The next morning, he finds his garden destroyed by local birds, but Alina willingly helps him replant, which earns his gratitude. Gradually, life in the house falls into some semblance of order. Alina runs the household, and Wyndham exercises, working on his leg. One day, the boy in the cap visits again. He is very curious and asks Wyndham many questions. Wyndham asks him to help Alina, as she is going to have a child, and they will need a doctor. The man asks the boy to bring some rope and something heavy to use as a counterweight. He plans to climb out and take them to the city, where he can take care of the woman and the boy. The boy promises to do everything when everyone is asleep or gone, but then one of the older boys appears and takes him away. Later, Wyndham tells Alina that the boy wants to study, that he is smart, different from the others, and wants to live differently. The man wants to help him, and help her too, but Alina reacts strangely. She tries to find out exactly what Wyndham is missing here. When he mentions freedom, Alina is puzzled. After all, no one forbids him from doing anything here. Isn't that freedom? Then the man tells her about the outside world, remembering the ocean and a cheeseburger. Alina doesn't know what that is, so Wyndham explains what the dish consists of. The woman admits that her mother used to say that mirages live outside. But here, in the desert, everything is real. Wyndham takes out his camera and shows her the photos he took on the day he ended up here. But what impresses the woman is not the solar eclipse, but a random shot in the car with music playing in the background. At night, he has nightmares about the terrifying faces of the children mocking someone. In the morning, he hears Alina's terrible scream from the yard, and rushing outside, he sees the boy in the cap crucified over the canyon on wires. The savages stand on the cliff, laughing. The woman suddenly declares that brothers wouldn't do such a thing. She accuses Wyndham of killing her son and strikes him on the head with a board. When he comes to, Wyndham finds himself in a cage. Despite his pleas and begging, Alina has no intention of letting him go. She feeds him like an animal, and her children come to watch his suffering. One day, he sees a girl standing on the cliff. She is clearly not from here. Wyndham catches her attention, though he is terrified to shout, fearing to wake Alina. Whispering, he begs the girl to call for help. She understands him, promises to do everything necessary, and leaves, assuring him she will return soon. Wyndham waits in hiding, watching the heavily pregnant Alina as she goes about her chores. Suddenly, he hears screams and sees the savages catching the girl. They drag her to the cliff and dramatically kill her before his eyes. Time passes. Wyndham remains in the cage. He involuntarily witnesses unnatural rituals performed by Alina, her children, and her brothers. One day, he suddenly tells Alina that he wants to stay here forever, to raise his child and love Alina, who will become his queen. He will teach the child everything he knows and is ready to give himself completely. And this is his choice. But hearing the word choice, the woman laughs. He never had one. He is just a seed blown here by the wind. And this child is only hers. The man will stay in the cage until the baby is born. After that, nothing in the desert goes to waste. Finally, the day of birth arrives. Alina screams in the house as Wyndham paces in the cage. The woman reaches him, begging for help, as she has never had such a difficult birth before. She releases the man from the cage, and he does his best to ease her pain. The children stand on the cliff, watching what is happening. Suddenly, Wyndham sees a ladder descending from above, but Alina cries out, and he stays by her side. The child is born at the moment of the solar eclipse. Wyndham takes the baby girl in his arms and kisses her, overjoyed to be a father. Alina begs him to give the baby to her, and when she receives the child, she promises to feed and protect her until she becomes the new mother. Then she will fulfill her purpose, just as Wyndham has fulfilled his now. At that moment, the boy sneaks up and slits the man's throat, exulting over the collapsing body, assuring him that he is doing it for the mother. Later, Alina gathers Wyndham's belongings and packs them in a chest, then goes to the baby, promising her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Wyndham's body decomposes in the yard of the house, sprouting grass and turning to dust. This is where this unusual film ends. Choi, a young promising guy, goes for an interview at a large corporation. On the way, he contacts his fiancée, who wishes him good luck. And then, suddenly, right before his eyes, a man crossing the street gets hit by a car and flies right under Choi's feet. The guy tries to help him, but the poor man dies in Choi's arms. This shocks Choi so much that he can't even answer basic questions during the interview. And, naturally, he's turned down for the job. He spends the next 7 years searching for work, working as a laborer, waiter, and taxi driver to pay off his debts while his friends gain experience and create families. He sends out thousands of resumes, goes to interviews, and believes he'll find a good job. But time passes, and nothing changes. One day, he goes for an interview at the same corporation as 7 years ago. After reading his resume, listing various odd jobs, the manager notes the guy's persistence, numerous certificates, and licenses he's obtained. Choi leaves the interview hopeful, but then he's told that his investments have completely burned down. In a fit of despair, he rushes to the investor to confront him and ends up breaking his doors. The neighbors call the police, but it's too late. Choi voluntarily handed his money to a scammer. Distraught, he walks to his fiancée's house and sees her being dropped off by a man in a luxurious car. She notices Choi and offers him money for the time being. Upset, Choi asks his fiancée to forget him, as she shouldn't tie her life to such a failure, and he goes home. He finds all his belongings at the doorstep, as the apartment owner evicted him for non-payment. In the morning, he receives a message rejecting him from the job at the corporation. This finally drives Choi insane. He climbs to the rooftop, realizing that his life went awry on the day the man hit by the car died in his arms. Choi is no longer afraid of death. He takes a step forward and falls, and on the ledge, his phone rings, displaying his mother's name. Choi regains consciousness and darkness. Confused, he removes the blindfold and finds himself in a chair inside an airplane. An unknown face is displayed in the monitor. Suddenly, a girl appears, reading his last note. She announces that he's dead, but strongly disagrees that death is a way to end the pain. She transports Choi to a place where she intends to show him real suffering. They find themselves on a tall tower, with cries coming from below. She is the goddess of death and intends to punish him for insulting death. With those words, the girl throws Choi down, and he falls into a horde of horrifying creatures in a sea of blood. He screams, fights off monsters, and he's back in the airplane. plane cabin, facing the goddess of death. Choi learns that as punishment, he must die 12 times in different people's bodies. If he wants to avoid hell, he must try to survive in at least one of the given lives. Choi tries to object, but death disappears. The plane's engine starts shaking, and a terrified Choi puts on a life jacket, despite the flight attendant explaining that it's just turbulence. Soon, everything stabilizes. Choi looks around the plane's cabin and marvels at the expensive items. Then, an unfamiliar glowing object appears before him, containing memories and skills of the person whose body he now inhabits. Choi finds himself in the body of the second son of the owner of the corporation, where he was so eager to get a job. The guy realizes he can continue his life with all this wealth and agrees to live on. However, the plane's engine explodes. Choi manages to reach his seat and fastens his seatbelt as the flight attendant is carried away into a gap. The plane explodes and Choi dies in the flames. But immediately he's reborn in a vast dark space, facing a glowing door leading to hell. Death sits at a table, loading a gun with bullets that will kill him each time, allowing him to transfer to another body. The glowing stone he saw will provide him with memories and abilities of the person whose body he enters. Choi doesn't understand the rules of this game. How can he survive if all the other deaths are just as inexorable? But Death believes it's his problem now. If he doesn't survive, he'll end up in the hell she intends to show him. Choi sees a burning space filled with cries and pain, and cries himself for not understanding his guilt. And then Death confesses his guilt is that he arrived at death before she came to him, but he still has a chance not to go to hell. Death shoots, and Choi finds himself falling from a great height as a man. At first, he pleads for help, but then the glowing stone appears, and Choi realizes his new body is that of an extreme sportsman, agreed to make a parachuteless jump into a specially made net, televised worldwide. If he succeeds, the sponsor will pay him a huge sum. The glowing object penetrates Choi, and endows him with the abilities of an athlete. The guy is confident that he can do it all. However, he crashes right in front of the net, shocking viewers worldwide. Choi finds himself on the brink of hell once again. He's outraged. He didn't have the slightest chance to survive. Then the guy starts recounting that he was born into a poor family, couldn't find a job, and lost his fiancée. He had nothing to hold on to. Death mocks his enumerated problems and shoots him in the head. Choi finds himself in the body of a teenager this time. He then sees one of his classmates watching a video of the crashed athlete and laughing at his death. A glowing stone appears, and Choi learns that he lives with his mother because his father died. The woman works hard to support her son, but he hates school because the class leader bullies him, and one day, after another beating, he decided to jump from the roof, and that's when Choi enters his body. Choi realizes that if he survives, he won't go to hell and can start over, but the class leader immediately reminds him to bring him some milk. He needs some milk! An indignant Choi grabs a chair and attacks the leader to teach him a lesson, but the leader's friends come to his aid. One of them, a tall, strong guy, beats up Choi, and no one comes to his rescue. During classes, Choi reflects on his situation and concludes that he first needs to gain the support of the strong guy. He returns home and, looking at the poor apartment, remembers his mother. He also grew up in poverty with a single mother, who is now completely alone. Having dinner with another mother, he sees his own and cries from the pain of loss. In the evening, he receives a message demanding money from the class leader, who constantly bullies Choi. The next day, Choi meets with the strong guy, and he explains that the class leader is friends with the strongest 11th grader, and he allows his henchmen to do whatever they want. During lunch, the leader again bullies Choi, and in front of the whole school, Choi pours noodles over his head. Shocked by such audacity, the leader orders the strong guy to catch Choi, but he suddenly refuses because he doesn't want to miss lunch. Realizing that no one is going to protect the leader, the others laugh at the now former leader. The strong guy remembers how Choi asked him not to interfere with what's about to happen. The former leader rushes to the 11th grader, who leads his gang to settle the matter. But upon seeing who his help was needed against, he's puzzled. Can't a schoolboy handle a little classmate on his own? Then why is he in his gang? The embarrassed former leader tries to attack Choi, but the strong guy steps in. The power of the foolish schoolboy has come to an end, and even his girlfriend prefers someone else now. Choi starts running to get stronger because he needs to be strong. And then, one evening, the former leader attacks him and kills him with a stone. Choi wakes up again on the brink of hell. He gets shot in the forehead and is reborn in a new body. He finds himself tied to a chair with a sack over his head. They torture him with water and then remove the bag, demanding to know where the girl and the money are. And when a hammer is raised above him, a glowing stone appears. Choi learns that he's in the body of a hitman. He once fell in love with the boss's girl, who asked him to help her escape. He hid the girl and the 10 billion won he stole from the boss and put in a secure place, but he got caught by the boss, and now the guy breaks free and attacks the thugs himself. He manages to turn off the lights and defeat the gang. Choi decides to find the stolen money, which he will use to start a new life. He opens the door and finds himself in a moving truck. Choi gets out on a motorcycle while the chase ensues. They corner him on a bridge, where he uses all of his skills to escape, causing a massive accident. Choi races through the night city on his motorcycle, but the pursuit doesn't let up. Then he enters a shopping mall, jumps into an elevator, and closes the doors before the pursuers can reach him. And when they finally catch up with him on the roof, he jumps straight into a pool. The boss orders to find the lucky guy, and he arrives at the pier, where a girl rushes into his arms, and when he tells her that the money is in the boat with lanterns, she shoots him. Choi finds himself at the gates of hell with a laughing death. But Choi is not so simple, because he didn't reveal the exact location of the money. In the next life, he hopes to find it. The guy dies and ends up in a prison cell. His friends warn him to behave well, or the murderer, a psychopath, will finish him off just 4 days before his release. Then, the psychopath enters this cell, and Choi recognizes him as the class leader who bullied classmates. Unable to contain himself, Choi attacks him. Other inmates drag him away, and then a glowing stone appears. Choi's new body is that of a guy who dreamed of becoming an MMA fighter, but his mother got into debt, and the guy agreed to commit a crime for someone else's money. The fighter was still a minor, so he got a suspended sentence for running over a pedestrian. However, during the trial, the victim died, and the guy received a real 2-year sentence. When the real culprit's lawyer came to him, the fighter threatened to expose him and demanded more money, and now Choi is trying to get the schoolboy to admit that he's not a scary psycho murderer, but a pathetic teenage killer. The inmates, outraged by such lies, beat up the murderer. One day, during work in the workshop, a tragic accident occurs. While the guards take away the injured, the others arm themselves and, stating that Choi won't leave the prison alive, attack him. But the future champion of MMA scatters the attackers. At night, he catches the schoolboy making a shank, and to punish him, he pretends to see dead people, and now the victim of the schoolboy is standing behind him, saying that he will forever haunt his killer. The former, very gullible class leader experiences a mental breakdown. The day of release arrives. Choi meets the lawyer of the real culprit, who brings him additional money, but suddenly the guy refuses them because he intends to live honestly from now on. Later, he goes to the pier and finds the 10 billion won hidden by his past self. He brings them to a rented apartment and makes plans for the future. At night, he dreams of his mother and wakes up in tears, and then he receives a call from the mother of his new body. Choi promises to come. He divides the money into 2 parts, preparing one for the new mother and hides the other in a storage room at the station. Choi goes to the area where the fighter lived. He is attacked by a man with a knife, and Choi doesn't understand who wounded him. The man reminds him that he ran over his daughter with a car. The guy apologizes and confesses that another person committed the hit and run, and he took the blame for the money. The perplexed man stops when footsteps are heard and flees. It turns out that Choi's prison buddy caught up with him, but suddenly he confesses that he went to prison to kill the fighter and is now glad to have found him first because there is a reward for his head. The guy stabs Choi, who dies, regretting the money, and the phone rings, displaying the name of the mother. Choi finds himself before death again, but this time he cries, remembering his mother. Death is disappointed with his new failure, and he asks to be shot. In the next life, he finds himself in the body of a young guy, not far from the train station. Choi runs to the storage room and manages to retrieve the bag with the money at the very last moment. Then he sees a guy on a poster, and the appearing stone informs that the guy works as a model. Choi goes home and admires the expensive furniture. Then a call comes in, and a friend of the model reminds him of a party. Choi goes to the party and realizes that he can't handle alcohol because he gets drunk quick. Suddenly, the CEO of the corporation where he tried to get a job several times at appears, and Choi tries to get to know him, but then he completely indulges in the fun. He wakes up when his older brother wakes him up. It turns out they have a whole cafe to take care of, and when his brother leaves, Choi has to take responsibility for it, and on this day, he needs to work as a waiter. And then, at the cafe, enters his fiancée from his previous life, Ji-sil. The guy is completely speechless. He remembers how they met when the girl lost several pages of her first book, and he picked them up, and how he suggested they break up because he considered himself unworthy of her. And now, a new meeting. Choi's brother, noticing his awkwardness, informs him that the girl is a famous writer. Choi immediately Googles and learns that the girl's novel recently won a contest. It was dedicated to her favorite guy. Choi remembers the night before he jumped from the roof. Apparently, in that envelope was her prize money. Upset, the guy leaves to find the girl's book. As he reads it, he realizes that it was based on their shared experiences and events. He told her that no one would cherish her more than he did, and he promised never to let her go. Now, in the cafe, he remembers that he promised to give her a fountain pen after the publication of her book because, according to her, every true writer should have one. That evening, he secretly bought the pen and asked for it to be engraved, but he never gave it to her. Then, the man who he saw in front of her house that day approaches Ji-sil, but now he is with his family and calls the girl his sister. Choi realizes his mistake. The next day, he meets the girl with her favorite tea and asks for permission to tell her the idea of a new book. He tells the story of a person experiencing a series of deaths. The girl is amazed because he narrates everything so realistically. She asks for the hero's name, but instead, Choi asks for her autograph, and suddenly he sees the same pen in the girl's hands, which, it turns out, was given to her by Choi's mother. From that day on, he meets with her daily and told her what his supposed hero was going through. The girl was astonished because everything sounded so realistic, as if he were talking about a real person. One day, he gave the girl a red umbrella because it was raining outside. He returned to the cafe, where a waitress broke a glass, and he helped her clean up the shards and cut his hand. Then, police sirens sounded in the distance, and the girls who entered the cafe began talking about the accident victim. Choi rushed to the scene of the tragedy and saw the broken red umbrella. He started shouting when he saw Ji-sil standing across the street. The girl saw all of this and stayed to bandage his hand and talk. She understood that the guy was scared for someone dear. After all, she behaved the same way when she learned about her beloved's death. As a farewell, she says that she won't come anymore because his stories reminded her of her loss. Later, she goes to Choi's burial place and cries in front of his photograph, and Choi himself watches this from the sidelines. After waiting for the girl to leave, he approaches the shelf with urns, where Choi's mother finds him. He hears her crying and cries himself, trying to beg for forgiveness. Later, he writes a letter to Choi's mother, supposedly from Choi's friend, and puts it in the bag with the money, then gives it to the woman. The next day, he meets Ji-sil and tells her the continuation of his story. She finds it amazing, and she allows him to accompany her home. On the way, she hopes that his story will end well because she feels sorry for the main character. He remembers how once she introduced him to her colleagues, not caring that he was a waiter, as she considered him hardworking and handsome. She meant everything to him, but he never told her that. He thought she would cope with his death, and now he wants to apologize for not understanding her properly and admits that he will only ever love her. He blames himself for not realizing that there are people around who will cry and laugh with him in moments of disappointment and joy. He understands that nothing can be changed, but everything he told her happened to him. He got into this body by the will of the goddess of death, and he calls himself by his real name, Choi. But then, a car runs into them. With fading eyesight, he sees the director of the same corporation stepping out of the car, who is upset with a broken bumper, and he remembers that in their lives he had encountered this man more than once. It was he who was responsible for the airplane crash, eliminating his brother as a competitor in that way, and for running over the girl, and now he calmly kills Choi. Later, the police and doctors remove the consequences of the accident, and Choi comes to his senses on the brink of hell and promises to himself to destroy this scoundrel, and then he grabs a gun and shoots the goddess of death. An amazing idea, excellent special effects, and a very deep meaning. And not in vain, according to many film critics, this series has become a real breakthrough in Korean cinema. Friends, I highly recommend watching it. At the moment, only 4 episodes have been released, and I'm eagerly awaiting the continuation. One day, the ruler of the Murakami province receives a warning from a neighboring feudal lord who has decided to seize a mountain to build a castle there. However, Lord Murakami orders the messenger to be killed and prepares to defend the village. Sometime later, the mountain is besieged by the neighbor's army, confident in victory and mocking the lord, whose face is hidden behind a mask. He sends his soldiers into battle, but the small group led by the Lord standing before them extends their hands forward, and the entire army falls, destroyed by an unknown weapon that literally pierces their bodies. Present day. At a university, a group of students studying paranormal abilities gathers. One of them, Yoji Minami Maru, nicknamed Nanmaru, possesses a small supernatural power, the ability to create tiny holes in everything, which he demonstrates on a stack of paper. The young people are impressed by his skill, but Nanmaru himself doesn't consider it useful since he can't even find a job. Just then he receives a summons from Professor Murakami and heads to the Department of History and Folklore, where he meets lecturer Emi, who is worried about the professor's absence. Murakami had gone on a research trip and disappeared. The woman is surprised by the boy's last name and asks about his family, but he can't recall anything of interest. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, located on Mount Murakami, a girl named Sachiko wakes up from a nightmare. Her grandmother brings her milk and tries to calm her down. Back at the Paranormal Enthusiasts Club, there's a disagreement, and one of the boys remarks on the uselessness of Nanmaru's ability. The boy gets upset and recalls how his grandfather taught him to punch tiny holes in objects by shouting, believing his grandson was special. At this moment, he is found by student Emi, Tagai. The thing is, Emi, while researching his genealogy, discovered a common ancestor in the boy's family and the professor's. She asked Nanmaru to help search for him, as the last case Murakami studied was the murder of their ancestor. The boy's parents can't help since their family moved away from there a long time ago. In the morning, they show him a model of the village made by Tagai, and Emi tells an ancient legend in which Nanmaru's ancestor betrayed Lord Murakami, leading to his death in battle. However, the professor found a written account that during the battle, all the enemies perished, with only one person on Murakami's side. And 10 days later, a festival took place on this spot, which would be very strange if the residents had betrayed and killed their lord. Tagai draws everyone's attention to the shape of the mountains around the village, as if they were artificially created. But who could have done such a thing back then? Later, Nanmaru demonstrates his ability to his new friends, which greatly impresses them. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, an official notices a strange black circle on a window pane. He reaches out, and his hand seems to be cut off, and then the man's head splits, as if struck by a spherical object. At the university, Emi asks Nanmaru to show his ability, and tells him that the professor also learned to punch holes in objects before he disappeared. However, they were much larger. At this point, the boy suggests that the ability might have come from their common ancestor. At that moment, everyone hears the news about the murder of the official in Marukawa. Nanmaru suggests they search for the professor themselves. The action returns to medieval times. Lord Murakami vows not to let anyone invade his lands. His fingers begin to extend, and strange round marks appear on his wrists. Present day. The students, along with Emi, arrive in Marukawa and begin searching for the professor, but no one has seen him. However, the young people find armor with round holes in the local museum, and on the local lord's banner, they notice the image of a magpie, a human hand, and a circle, the meaning of which no one knows. They discover that after Minami Maru's death, his lord gave his youngest son to his family so the lineage would not die out. So Nanmaru is a descendant of the lord himself. They question people on the street, but no one has seen the professor. Soon the students find the building where the murder occurred and for the first time wonder if Nanmaru's ability could punch through window glass. At a cafe, the group learns about the upcoming Tanabata festival. The men sitting at a nearby table suddenly mention that the professor's presence will make the festival unforgettable and lead to the Lord's revival. Tagai asks questions, but the men pretend to know nothing about the professor. Then they hear Nanmaru's name and become excited. Later, the friends joke about how the locals consider Nanmaru to be the Lord and practically worship him. Emi reminds them that Tanabata is Japan's Day of Lovers, celebrated on July 7th. On this night, the stars Vega in the constellation Lyra and Altair in the constellation Aquila, separated by the Milky Way, come closest, and the magpie lays a bridge between them. But what do these facts reveal? The next day, the group goes to the mountain where the festival will take place and finds 7 strangely shaped stones standing in the middle of a clearing. Later, Sachiko visits Nanmaru, wanting to see the boy's abilities. He punches a can, but it seems that the girl expected something different. In the evening, Emi suggests returning to Tokyo because she doesn't trust the locals. Meanwhile, the hotel owner makes a phone call, reporting that Nanmaru can make holes in objects. The next day, a young man whom Sachiko calls her brother and clearly fears enters her home, but the grandmother asks him to leave and never return. Nanmaru meanwhile goes to the cafe, and the owner reminds him that this village is his real home. The boy asks Sachiko to explain her comment about the man who can achieve, and she arranges to meet him. In the evening, the girl explains that in the town, 2 types of people with superpowers are born: achievers and window openers. There are only 5 of the former, including Nanmaru, but the latter are those worthy of becoming priests of Mount Murakami. The boy doesn't understand what's so exciting about this since the hole is so small, but the girl abruptly cuts him off. She just wants to live a normal life. After all, she is a window opener. Meanwhile, Sachiko's brother Takashi is walking among people and encounters some local guys. Emi notices a strange glow over the mountain. She and Tagai head there and see a group of people in white robes, dancing with torches in a clearing, summoning someone. Meanwhile, the guys beat Takashi and, pulling off his hat, see a stone embedded in his forehead. They leave him on the road. Emi and Tagai sneak closer to the dancers and see a masked man performing some kind of ritual. After the people leave, the pair approach the stones and realize there are only 6. It means that each day of the festival, 1 stone will disappear. At this moment, Takashi raises his hands and his attackers lose their legs. Another group of people in white arrives at the mountain. Meanwhile, a newspaper article is published about the outrage of local residents protesting the construction of a golf course on the mountain's peak, as this place is sacred to them. At this time, the people in white capture Emi and Tagai, but she shouts the professor's name and one of the men uncovers his face. It turns out to be the village head, who led the Tanabata ritual passed down through generations in the Murakami family. They apologize and ask her to describe what she saw. Emi recounts the first group that had already been there. Returning to town, she asks the students to leave while she stays to find the professor, as she is sure he is alive. In the morning, Nanmaru says goodbye to Sachiko and exchanges emails with her. Later, Emi sees the students off just as Takashi arrives at the hotel and realizes that the boy has left. Noticing that the hotel owner is making a call, he smashes the phone. He finds out the boy's address in Tokyo and leaves. He later finds Nanmaru at the club and begins teaching him how to use his power. He raises his hands and a sphere grows between his palms, which he calls a sphere beyond reality. It can easily dismember a person or another object. Nanmaru follows his advice and creates his first sphere. Seeing its size, Takashi runs for water and trying to pour it over the sphere, breaks the bucket. He then convinces the boy that they are chosen. All of this is witnessed by Nanmaru's classmate, Aki. Later, Nanmaru writes to Sachiko, and she advises him to stay away from her brother. At the cafe in Marikawa, unknown men in black suits arrive, which the owner immediately reports to the town leader. He orders everyone to keep their mouths shut. On the same day, the professor calls Emi, apologizes, and tells her that his window has opened. He assures her that he didn't kill anyone and says goodbye to her. In Tokyo, a meeting takes place with a politician who wants to run for a higher office. While he is speaking to the assembled crowd, a man with a masked face enters the university building and places his long-fingered hands against the wall. Suddenly, a huge black sphere appears on stage, right in front of the politician. The man reaches out to it, and his body is immediately sliced in half. Meanwhile, Emi returns to Tokyo, and Nanmaru demonstrates his new abilities, which frightens his friends. After all, this is how the murder in Marikawa happened. That night, Sachiko visits her grandfather, who has round marks on his arms and a stone grows in his forehead. Meanwhile, the person who ordered the politician's murder, known as the Baron, watches the footage of the event and praises his subordinate for coming up with such a way to dispose of an undesirable person, but the murder in Marakawa was unnecessary. Therefore, he needs someone more obedient. That morning, Takashi comes to Nanmaru again to suggest that he participate in a project to train people in superpowers. A significant number of people attend this paid seminar. Under Takashi's guidance, Nanmaru demonstrates his power by smashing a metal statue. This causes unprecedented excitement among the audience. Nanmaru himself is delighted with the fee he received, unaware that Takashi and his accomplice, host Yokihara, earned hundreds of times more. The guys discuss Nanmaru's foolishness, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation. That evening, the Baron is informed that one of the achievers lives in Tokyo. Meanwhile, Nanmaru notices a strange growth on his forehead. At the same time, Emi continues studying the professor's papers and suddenly seems to see him. Murakami reminds her that Tanabata was first celebrated on April 29th, and so it has always been, but it's already May now. Emi rushes to check the records and realizes that the dates have changed. In the Western Gregorian calendar they coincide, including the very first, but this calendar was only introduced in 1582, and only in Catholic countries. But how could it have appeared in Marakawa? Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues participating in seminars, supposedly teaching people superpowers. The boy tries to explain that not everyone can do this, but no one believes him. Then Aki lets him listen to the recording she made. Nanmaru refuses to participate in the seminars, explaining that his power is not meant for deceit. Meanwhile, in Marakawa, Sachiko meets a masked man at her mother's grave, whom she calls Lord Yoriyuki Murakami. At the evening gathering, the town leader reports to Sachiko's grandfather about a group of outsiders looking for achievers in their town. He reminds them of the rules: no one should know the village's secret. The next day, Yoriyuki is brought to the Baron. The achiever demands that the village be left alone, but the Baron claps his hands and 4 armed men run out of the neighboring rooms. However, Yoriyuki is much faster, and all fall with pierced heads. He agrees to work temporarily for the Baron and removes the mask from his face. The Baron is horrified to see a completely inhuman face. Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues to look for a job where he could properly use his power. Suddenly, he hears calls for help. Passers-by have found a child in a locked car. They locate the mother, but she has lost her keys and cannot open the vehicle. Seeing the boy losing consciousness from the heat, Nanmaru uses his powers to smash the car's window. People are impressed, and the mother thanks the savior. Later, he sees a news report about the incident, but these same shots catch the attention of Takashi in Yokihara. They begin vandalizing the signs of establishments with problems. TV reports about them start to appear, raising social issues. Everyone discusses the unknown boy, whom they nicknamed Chisel. The police start an investigation. The Baron is displeased with the commotion, but Yoriyuki assures him that he knows who is responsible. Meanwhile, in Marakawa, people believe that Takashi is behind all this. Sachiko's grandfather and the professor ask the girl to go to Tokyo. Following his friend's advice, Nanmaru decides to become a janitor, thinking he could simply destroy the trash. However, the group soon notices that the mark on his forehead grows with each use of his power. One day, Sachiko arrives in Tokyo. She confesses to Emi that the town lied. The professor was there all along. Now he hands his assistant a letter of apology through Sachiko. She explains that all the town's residents have been having nightmares. Their conversation is interrupted by Nanmaru's arrival. The girl notices the mark on his forehead, but the boy doesn't understand her hints. He points out the place where Takashi might be. At another seminar where Takashi continues to deceive people, a delegation from the town arrives and demands that these activities stop. Takashi, pointing at Nanmaru, accuses the boy of wanting to monopolize the gift, and no matter how much Nanmaru yells trying to explain the truth, people don't listen. Then Sachiko steps forward. She accuses her brother of lying and calls him a killer. Takashi raises his hands as if preparing to create a sphere, but at that moment a loud pop is heard and a huge hole appears in the window. Yoriyuki, standing below, calls Takashi to him and the latter runs down. He orders Takashi to stop deceiving people, but the seminar attendees don't want that, so Yoriyuki instantly creates a massive sphere and blows off part of the roof. He explains that no one can develop this gift, even after thousands of years of training, and shows his hands. But upon noticing Nanmaru, he suddenly declares that the boy must be erased. Sachiko shields him with her body, and the blow strikes the ground. Later, the townspeople explain to Nanmaru that Yoriyuki Murakami would have been the ruler of the settlement in ancient times. Now he eliminates disobedient telekinetics. That's why he took Takashi away. Uncontrolled power is a threat to the village's existence. Nanmaru doesn't understand. Hasn't anyone ever used the gift for good? But he is abruptly cut off. Later, Sachiko and Nanmaru have dinner together, and he shows her Tokyo at night. Nanmaru receives his first job order for trash removal. That night, Sachiko asks for permission to stay with him. She explains that the village residents fear the dark side of the gift and shows Nanmaru her back, scarred and disfigured. The girl also shows him a family photo that includes Yoriyuki, who once looked like a normal person and loved her mother. However, according to village customs, the girl was married off to another. Her father couldn't accept that his children exhibited a weak power, constantly harassing his son and forcing him to train. Her mother, tired of the constant strife, asked Yoriyuki, who had become the mountain's priest, for help. He began training Takashi, who eventually created his first sphere. The boy started visiting the priest frequently, which didn't please his father. After gaining his gift, Takashi became aggressive and took out his anger on his little sister. When everyone was on the verge of breaking down, Sachiko began having dreams. One day she overheard an argument between her father and Takashi in the garden and caught her brother standing over her father's bloodied body. Takashi insisted he didn't do it, but their mother expelled him from the house. The grandfather and the village residents covered up the incident. One day her mother went to the mountain, asking the girl to bring Yoriyuki, who had already lost his human form. On the way she talked about her nightmares, but he confessed that everyone saw them. They reached the mountain, where her mother left this world. Afterward, Yoriyuki left the village, only returning when he learned that a developer wanted to desecrate the mountain. Takashi wouldn't have been able to do it, being too small-minded and self-centered. She's glad that Nanmaru sees the gift in a positive light. Meanwhile, the police start investigating the disappearance of their officers. One detective constantly recalls the incident on stage and meets Aki, who insists that the spatial sphere is no mere trick. Suddenly, Nanmaru suggests to his friends that they shut down the project, believing the gift is too great for mere trash removal. Later he goes to see Emmi, who tells him that she found a few strange phrases about the solar years in the professor's letter. She compared the facts and realized that the village used a solar, not a Gregorian, calendar. During the festival, the solstice was always present. Thus, the Tanabata festival lasted 3 days before the solstice, 1 day during it, and 3 days after. Nanmaru later takes a job with a cleaning company. Meanwhile, Aki suggests that the detective team up with her to investigate the unexplained incidents. That night, Nanmaru has his first nightmare, where he falls into a void. Suddenly he hears Sachiko screaming, begging him not to approach the other side. Ahead he sees an opening door and wakes up. The next day, a car, a boat, and a plane disappear in the city. Aki and the detective track down Yoriyuki, who arrives to meet Takashi and warn him about the danger of opening windows. However, Aki and the detective are caught by the Baron's men. Yoriyuki then demonstrates the disappearance of a prominent politician right at the door of a nearby building. The guards drag in the bound Aki and the detective, but Yoriyuki leaves, not considering them important. Meanwhile, Nanmaru starts work, clearing old items from an office. Suddenly he realizes that these items were precious to someone and have a history. He runs to the roof where the others are working and asks for permission to leave some things in the building. His co-worker agrees and begins asking Nanmaru about his abilities. At that moment, they see a massive sphere floating above the city. The next moment, it bursts and erases several buildings. It turns out Yoriyuki is doing this a few blocks away. Seeing the explosion, people mistake it for a terrorist attack. Panic ensues. Nanmaru runs with everyone else and suddenly finds himself in a field strewn with the bodies of medieval warriors. But before he can be scared, he returns to his time. Yoriyuki tells Takashi that he will soon put an end to the nightmares. Meanwhile, in the village, Sachiko hears an announcement about the disappearance of 200 people in the destroyed buildings. Her grandmother doesn't believe Yoriyuki did it. After all, he was the protector of the people, but many eyewitnesses saw the massive black sphere and no one else possesses such power. Sachiko asks her mother for help. Nanmaru continues having nightmares, where Sachiko begs him not to approach the windows or else he will find himself on the other side. The next day, the government declares a quarantine and asks everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, in the village, people discuss the events, not believing that their Yoriyuki could have done such a thing. Meanwhile, the detective regains consciousness and finds that they are in some basement. Sachiko's grandfather contacts Emmi, after which she decides to go to Markawa. Nanmaru finds Takashi in his room. He accuses him of killing people, but Takashi explains that Yoriyuki wants to end the nightmares. He suddenly asks the boy to do him a favor and convey his apologies to Sachiko. Nanmaru admits that his sister doesn't consider him a killer, and that turns out to be the most important thing for him. At the same time, Yoriyuki decides to break off the deal with the Baron and informs his bodyguard. Before leaving, Takashi gives Nanmaru a piece of paper with the address and plan of the place where Aki and the detective are being held. He goes there and arrives just as one of the bodyguards forces the detective to shoot Aki. But then the Baron calls, ordering him to come immediately. Nanmaru distracts the remaining guard by creating a sphere and tries to free the captives. However, there is another guard who points a weapon at him. The detective tries to interfere and the gun falls, wounding the guard. The men struggle and Nanmaru creates a sphere, preparing to send it at the guard. But Aki screams, the boy comes to his senses and he breaks through the wall. He frees the captives and leads them out. Later he notices that the stone in his forehead has grown and realizes that he almost killed someone recently. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki tells the Baron that he needs to experiment with the sphere's precision and flight range. After he leaves, the Baron realizes the danger of the monster and plans to go to the Prime Minister. But at that moment, the city center is engulfed by a giant sphere and a massive hole in the ground appears where the building stood. The next day, all channels broadcast news of the deaths of people in the newly formed craters. The government urges residents to stay home. However, Nanmaru goes to meet his friends, who are joined by Aki. Nanmaru recalls Yoriyuki's words about getting rid of the nightmare and promises to go all the way to find out what he meant. Gathering together, the group heads to Marakawa, where they are met by Sachiko and a delegation of locals. Nanmaru recounts Yoriyuki's words about the nightmares, but none of the locals hurry to explain. Emi then sternly urges them to avoid another incident with the loss of lives. She wants to know what the windows are, why the Tanabata festival is needed, and what the role of the mountain priest is. However, the villagers admit that they don't understand Yoriyuki's plan. Nanmaru loses his temper. He respects the town's customs, but the power of the mountain kills, and Yoriyuki is a killer. The town leader promises to introduce the group to the master, Sachiko's grandfather. He also plans to invite Professor Murakami to the meeting. In the morning, Yoriyuki and Takashi arrive at the master's estate. The maid greets the guests and rushes to warn the master of the unexpected visitors. The old man immediately accuses Yoriyuki of killing the official, but Yoriyuki reminds him that the man wanted to destroy the sacred mountain by turning it into a golf course. Yoriyuki has found answers to his questions and is ready to break the rules. The pair are about to leave, but suddenly the visitor stops. He senses armed men hiding in the yard and prepares to fight. The Baron's men open fire, but the bullets don't touch Yoriyuki. The maid rushes to her master. Meanwhile, Nanmaru's group walks along the road leading to the estate. Sachiko tells Nanmaru that the locals fear him. Deep down, they are vassals. The town leader thanks Tagai for the model of their area, saying the professor told him it helped solve the problem. At this time, in the master's house, Yoriyuki distributes the exits to attack the enemy from different sides. Meanwhile, soldiers burst into the master's bedroom and open fire. Yoriyuki tears them apart with a sphere. Nanmaru's friends hear the shots and run to the estate. The Baron's assistant brings in reserve troops and orders the estate to be surrounded. Yoriyuki and Takashi are caught in a circle. They stand back to back, grow spheres, and kill the soldiers. Yoriyuki creates a whole bunch of spheres. One of the soldiers, dying, shoots Takashi. When Nanmaru's group arrives at the estate, they find a pile of bodies. The old master, dying, orders them to stop Yoriyuki. Nanmaru and Sachiko step into the yard as the Baron's men leave the estate. Yoriyuki is leading the wounded Takashi along a forest path, but the boy is getting worse. Eventually, he falls and dies. Nanmaru and Sachiko also find the forest path and soon see Takashi's body. Sachiko takes her brother's death hard. Meanwhile, Emi finds a handprint on the door with long fingers, belonging, according to legend, to the monster Kasasagi. Later, the group returns to the town, where they are unexpectedly stopped by Sachiko's grandmother, who asks Nanmaru to go with her, as she received an order from the new master, Professor Murakami, to protect the boy. He ends up at Sachiko's house. In the evening, the young people meet on the veranda. Sachiko asks him to be careful and offers sweet sake, which helps with nightmares. She believes that the dead turn into stars in the sky. The distance between them is vast. No matter how much you scream, no one will hear you, and the loneliest thing is your own death when you are the only one stepping out of the window. The girl talks about her nightmares where she is searching for someone. Unexpectedly, she finds herself on a mountain where she feels the presence of someone beyond the Milky Way, and they extend a hand to her. Nanmaru grabs her hand and confesses that Takashi regretted his behavior. Sachiko, however, hopes that her brother did not go into the darkness alone. That night, Emi struggles to sleep, replaying everything that happened in her mind. The next day, despite the police's order to stay indoors, the men of Marakawa arrange a meeting, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation, which he later shows to Emi. The friends discover that there are no news reports anywhere about the massacre in the town and decide to go to the meeting. Meanwhile, the police knock on Sachiko's grandmother's door, searching for Nanmaru, but the girl leads him out through the back door. However, Nanmaru is convinced that the police are looking for Yoriyuki. In the evening, the residents on their way to the meeting are stopped by the police. A confrontation ensues, which Emi and her students observe. Then the Baron's men arrive, also seeking to capture Yoriyuki, but the residents refuse to hand over their priest. The Baron's assistant fires a shot over their heads, claiming that Yoriyuki possesses a terrifying power that could destroy the planet. At this point, Nanmaru intervenes, suggesting they meet with Yoriyuki first to let him explain his actions. When people start shouting again, he creates a sphere. Nanmaru admits that he doesn't know why he has such abilities, but there can be no talk of betrayal by the town. Then Professor Murakami steps out from the crowd. Emi is horrified to see the enormous stone in his forehead and faints. Nanmaru is at a city council meeting. He asks them to agree that he will convince Yoriyuki to talk to the police and the Baron's men. Guards will wait for him on the mountain to persuade him to leave the town without harming its residents. Later, he informs his friends that the professor wants to meet with them in his laboratory. In the morning, the team goes to Murakami. They gather around the model, and the professor begins his explanation. The village festival was established and held for 7 days during Tanabata, the summer solstice. In Chinese history, from which this festival originated, it symbolized a magpie that bridged the Milky Way. It was also on the Lord's flag, but it turns out that magpies didn't exist in Japan at that time, so it must have been something similar. The professor asks Tagai to help him, smears his hand with ink, and asks him to make a handprint. He then shows Yoriyuki's handprint left at the master's estate and aligns them in a specific order. The group immediately recalls the Lord's emblem in the Marikawa Museum. It looks as though a long-fingered hand is passing a sphere to a human hand. The professor asks them to look at the model. Tagai immediately notices that the mountains seem artificial and that Tanabata takes place on the solstice days when a second sunset can be seen. Murakami simulates the sunset during the solstice, and the group is surprised to see 2 hands and a black sphere between them in the mountainous landscape. The professor marvels at the unknown master's creation, an enormous earth sculpture spanning several kilometers. One might consider that it was created by the Kasasagi, who appeared in this area, perhaps from the sky. How would people have reacted to this? After all, according to the peasants' beliefs, the entire land was inhabited by gods, and they couldn't always distinguish between good and evil. The Kasasagi, who became gods to them, began visiting this planet regularly, as mentioned in many tales and legends. And if you look at Mount Murakami, you can see that it resembles a helicopter landing pad, so the festival torches served as guiding lights. The festival itself began as a ceremony to welcome the gods during the summer solstice, but at some point, the Kasasagi stopped appearing. Yet for thousands of years, people continued to meet them, even though they never came. However, the town became trapped in its beliefs. Invisible chains keep the initiates in one place. Fear and loneliness are what lie beyond the window, and the window openers have to wait for the Kasasagi. The professor and Sachiko are among those the visitors learned to reach thousands of years ago, using their minds. The large flag on the mountain most likely symbolizes loyalty and a reminder that one should not leave this earth. For this, fear is instilled in the window openers. That's why the locals have protected this mountain for every era. It's hard to believe, but it's unknown whether the Kasasagi will ever return. They may have died long ago. The next morning, the guards on the mountain come out for breakfast, and later Emi and her students arrive. The professor is concerned about their well-being and suggests they all go to the city, but Nanmaru refuses. He feels obligated to be the first to meet Yoriyuki. Murakami supports his decision as the townspeople need protection. Each generation of priests has ingrained the sacred duty into their minds, but the professor is the only one who thought to create a model and can now visually show people what is really happening here. They light bonfires to show Yoriyuki that there are people here. After all, he most likely wants to destroy the mountain. That would end everything, but the people are becoming hostages. In the evening, the students and Nanmaru go on watch. The boy asks Sachiko about her dreams and suggests they leave this place to start a new life. Moreover, he feels something for her. At that moment, the Baron's men appear. They haven't waited for Yoriyuki and demand to know where he is, otherwise they'll start killing the townspeople. The professor is outraged and even creates a sphere, but then one of the Baron's soldiers shoots his comrades and removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Yoriyuki. Those who haven't seen his form before scream in fear. The Baron's assistant tries to shoot him and immediately dies from a sphere. Yoriyuki admits that he always imagined the black sphere as a trash chute. He simply pushed those who posed a threat to the village into it, but now he doubts that. The ancestors, the Kasasagi, might have contacted their descendants many times, but most of them didn't develop the ability to leave with them unharmed. He believes that his ancestors were from other stars. They possessed knowledge and logic foreign to Earthlings. But what if it's not a window but a gate? And by entering the sphere, you can be transported to the ancestors' planet? That's why he changed his plans. At that moment, people see a huge black sphere above their heads. Yoriyuki announces that he intends to leave with the Kasasagi. Sachiko suddenly asks him to take her with him. The dark world is calling to her, and she wants to find peace. Nanmaru reminds her of her dreams. The girl reaches out, and through the darkness, she sees an inhuman hand beckoning her from another reality. But just as she is about to grasp it, Nanmaru grabs her wrist. Yoriyuki shakes his head. Nanmaru will never understand the feelings of the window openers. The boy agrees, but he doesn't like that the girl is ready to go into the afterlife without experiencing even a small part of this vast world. Here there is wisdom, mistakes, and attempts to start over. The world is thousands of years old, and compared to that, all superpowers are insignificant. He doesn't want her to leave and asks her to stay. The girl agrees. She remembers how her mother once left for the sphere. Yoriyuki also recalls that moment and promises to wait for her. The sphere begins to grow, and Nanmaru orders everyone to run. The people rush down the mountain while Yoriyuki stands under the sphere, waiting for it to consume him. A massive explosion occurs. Nanmaru's team manages to take cover in the forest, and the town's electricity goes out. Time passes. Tagai enrolls in graduate school. Emi and Murakami resign from the department and now live together in Marikawa. Aki has become an independent internet journalist and now lives with the former policeman. The people of Marikawa quickly reconstructed the area where the mountain once stood. Nanmaru has opened a company where people exchange items without using money. It's strange but highly successful. He no longer uses his abilities, which means his appearance will remain unchanged. One day he goes to Marikawa, where a festival is scheduled to take place in the evening. After all, the festival continues in the hope that someone will come from the Milky Way, and Sachiko lives in her house, always waiting for Nanmaru. The series is based on the manga by Hitoshi Iwaki, the author of the famous Parasite. While the middle of the plot may drag a bit, the finale ties everything together and thoroughly explains the events on screen, which is a rare feat in modern cinema. Evening supermarket. Near one of the shelves, a young man is talking on the phone with his wife. The woman is irritated, and the guy is trying to justify himself. He didn't intentionally almost buy the wrong product, and his purchase of a PlayStation has nothing to do with it, and they wouldn't have been able to relax in a Lupka even with that money. He went there for work. At the checkout, there are 3 people in line. The first is a man who looks a bit homeless. The cashier announces the total, and the man is short of 10 rubles. He tries to persuade the cashier, but she remains firm. So the man turns to those waiting in line. If they care about the fate of a person, they should lend him the missing amount. He asks them to think that they are all preparing for a terrible judgment. And what will they be able to tell when facing the Almighty? While the man delivers this speech, people react differently. One person leaves the line altogether. The man turns to a young guy. It seems like he's not destitute. So, what are 10 rubles to him? A woman standing behind him takes out a coin. The man thanks her and says that angels won't forget her, and perhaps this act will outweigh all her sins. Then he takes out 50 rubles from his pocket and gives it to the cashier. He returns the coin to woman, places a 10-ruble coin on the counter, and tells the young guy that he will need it. The man adds that he will have something to remember. In hell. The homeless man leaves, and the young guy makes the payment. The cashier asks for change, 10 rubles, and he hands her the homeless man's coin. The young guy exits to an empty parking lot. He continues his phone conversation, again justifying himself for some business trip and a woman whom his wife is jealous of. He sees the man who was sitting on the curb earlier. He approaches and gives him the coin because he doesn't need someone else's. The homeless man asks, is he afraid of burning in the fiery Gehenna? Perhaps he believes in the Lord? The guy confesses that he's not very religious, to which the homeless man inquires, so, after death he plans to become worm food? Is that the pinnacle of his life? The guy says he's a mathematician and believes in the exact sciences. He asks if there's any evidence of God's existence. The homeless man claims there is an undeniable fact. The guy starts making fun of him and suggests taking a break from doing nothing on the way back. The homeless man starts crying. The guy is confused about what upset him so much. He reassures the homeless man, telling him he's young and he has everything ahead of him. It's the right time to think about the future because it all depends on him. By the way, he mentioned earlier that he can provide evidence of God's existence. And the homeless man calmly says that he saw Jesus himself because he is the eternal Jew, the one who didn't let the Lord rest at his house when he was carrying his cross. He told Jesus that he would rest on the way back. Jesus agreed, but he would have to wait for him. The guy asks again, and this happened 2,000 years ago. The homeless man understands that it does indeed sound strange. He was amazed at first too, but then he got used to it. So, for him, the existence of Jesus Christ is a fact. However, he can't prove it in any way. He didn't keep a piece of clothing that Jesus wore, and how could he prove that it wasn't a piece of his own underwear? He doesn't have the cup from which Christ drank or the stone from under his cross. The guy concedes that the Jew saw Jesus. What was he like? The homeless man says he was just like everyone else, only tormented. He also doesn't remember his face. The guy remembers all the faces he's seen in his life. The guy is puzzled and asks again to tell him what happened. The Jew says that Jesus was being led past his house under guard. He stopped to rest, and the Jew forbade him to lean on his house. After all, he called himself the Son of God. It was outrageous, so he told him that he would rest on the way back, and God ordered him to wait for him. He couldn't know who he really was, and no one could. The guy asks if the Jew is ashamed that he didn't let Jesus rest. The homeless man asks, maybe that was God's plan? The guy asks if he tried to make amends for it. Maybe become a clergyman, for example. The conversation partner admits that he tried that many times, but no one descended from the heavens, and no indulgence was granted. The guy asks, what else has he been throughout all these years? Maybe an immortal killer. An immortal killer, that would be cool. The Jew objects. Being immortal is cool in movies, but in real life, you need to find food, seek warmth, and wait, like waiting in line. He has already studied all the ads on the walls, all the holes in the couch, but people keep coming and going. It's no longer interesting to him who stood where in the hierarchy, whose place was more comfortable, who jumped the queue. The guy inquires, what is he waiting for? The second coming, or the end of the world? The homeless man nods, maybe both. No one knows when the end will come. The guy is puzzled again, but an ordinary person is afraid of death. So is the homeless man. He's eternal, but if you cut off one of his fingers, he won't keep living with 4 fingers. He's broken his bones many times. But what if a tank shoots him in the head? Will he be an undying headless man? The homeless man confidently says that won't happen. Hasn't he tried to end his life himself? The Jew nods. Of course, he even tried to hang himself in the very beginning. He hung from a tree for 2 weeks with excruciating pain in his throat until the branch broke. Later, in 1945, he was captured by the fascists and got scared. He tried to shoot himself. The gun jammed. It was exploded, shredding his whole arm with shrapnel. But everything healed. He came to Russia from Poland 40 years ago. The guy is curious again. Maybe he's just schizophrenic, and doesn't it bother him at all? How did he decide that all these events were real? The homeless man shows his arm. He made notches. 920, 1464, 1812. Decades pass. And he sits and thinks, maybe he scratched them yesterday, put the dates, as if 200 years had passed. And he asks for help to figure it out, like stabbing him with a knife, for example. But the guy refuses. He doesn't want to explain to the police that he saw Jesus and shouldn't have died. The homeless man shrugs, saying, that's how it works. They walk across the parking lot. The guy asks him to tell something from history. For instance, what was happening in the 1st century? The homeless man responds, well, in general, it was the same. Shepherds herded sheep and fishermen fished. The guy insists, but in the world, the significant appearance of Jesus, church reforms, any mysteries and intrigues? The homeless man, in puzzlement, asks, where does he know all this from? He also learned it from books. Now, the guy remembers where he was in August 2000. Throughout the ages, he just lived. He was in different countries. It's just that the body requires a warm place and a piece of bread. As for how neighbors reacted to him being eternally alive and forever young, they didn't pay much attention to him, and he didn't stay in one place for long. Does he know ancient languages? He does, but now they are considered dead, and who can verify them? The men touch upon the topic of space. The homeless man has seen many strange things, but he hasn't encountered extraterrestrials. The most pressing question, Can it really be that in all this diversity of worlds, there are no other forms of life? The guy comments that it's all too profound for a homeless, possibly heavy-drinking man. The homeless man leaves, and the guy locks his car and follows him. He asks, why did Jesus punish him? Shouldn't he be all-forgiving? The Jew says that it wasn't Jesus who punished him at all. He cursed himself with his own words, and the Lord simply fulfilled his own wish. The biggest curse is not that he's been waiting for 1,000 years, but that he, like a dull shepherd, remained the same. A person who creates, lives a spiritually enriched life. The guy doesn't believe it. It just can't be. After all, he's been living for so long. He knows much more than others. Surely he met great people like Michelangelo or Nietzsche. To this, the homeless man retorts, how can you understand what they'll say about this specific person after death, that he was a genius? The guy asks how people lived, what they thought and what they believed in 1,000 years ago. The homeless man responds, they believed the earth was flat, that God sat in the sky above the clouds and watched every step. But if he is simply looking through our own eyes, then he is just an observer, and he can't judge us for our actions, right? It means he is concerned about our actions only as much as they concern us. And if God is in everyone, then so is the devil. The guy teases him. Those are some profound words for a weird man. The homeless man smiles. In a certain sense, a person always has a choice. And fate exists. The fate of a person is determined by their choice. But at any moment they can stop choosing that fate and start choosing another. So why, even in the modern world, are people willing to kill those who don't share their faith? You just need to make an effort to keep your opinion about someone else's religion to yourself. A person finds something sacred for themselves, and it gives their life meaning, but then they start comparing their primary gender characteristics. They try to prove that their meaning is more significant and more important than another person's. Of course, it leads to conflict. His wife calls again. The guy apologizes and says he hasn't finished yet. He met an interesting person and got engrossed in conversation. She says she'll come over now. He goes back to the homeless man and sits down next to him. The guy asks, why is he homeless if he's so intelligent? And why doesn't he want to change anything? The homeless man says he's living like he's preparing for a big exam, postponing the transformation of his life for later. The conversation partner says he's living somewhat similarly, but he doesn't want to think about death. He's still very young after all. The Jew reassures him, you won't even notice how it passes. No matter what a person does, middle age arrives, and then old age. And deep down, every old man feels like a little boy. The guy says he doesn't want to think about old age and death. Probably that's why people invented religion, to make it seem like there's something after death. Then he smiles and says that he's been clearly fooled. His conversation partner hasn't lived for 2,000 years. He doesn't seem crazy, but maybe he has a special organism? Cells divide more frequently, the body constantly regenerates, unique genetics perhaps. Probably they can make medicine from his blood. It can't be that he hasn't done anything remarkable throughout his life. He was in Poland during World War II. Did he hide Jews? The Jew laughs. He is a Jew himself. It was a Polish family that hid him, and then they were discovered and taken as prisoners. That's when he tried to shoot himself. The guy laments, well, yes, times were tough. The homeless man disagrees. Times are always the same. The conversation partner is astonished, but how can that be? Everything has changed in the world. If you trace history from the Middle Ages to the present day, a lot has changed. The Jew says that everything changes if you pay attention to those changes every day, just like a river flows, rages, and is never the same. However, the way that river flowed 100 years ago is the same way it flows today, in the same channel. The guy becomes more animated and asks the homeless man what he thinks about the paradox of faith. Can God create a stone that he can't lift? The homeless man explains, it's a paradox of the mind. If he's a scientific atheist, he'd agree that all information about the surrounding world enters the mind through the senses. The idea of God is in his mind, so the problem is in his mind. God in your mind can't create a stone in your mind that he's about to lift in your own mind. The guy is puzzled, but if he can't lift it, then he's not all-powerful. The homeless man advises him not to overcomplicate things in his mind. The conversation partner sighs. He would like to get some answers. The homeless man says he would like to get some answers too. For example, he wants to know what our purpose is, or what happens after death, or what one needs to accomplish in life. Then he asks the guy what he personally would do if he lived for 1,000 years. Seeing the guy pondering, he concludes, He would simply live and nothing else. On the first day, he'd jump for joy. And then? The guy is puzzled. How can one realize oneself as an immortal person then? After all, if humans are God's creations, why did he create them? There must be some meaning to it, right? The homeless man agrees. There must be, but he doesn't know it. And he doesn't know a single person who has realized themselves. Even those who entered history feel like something is missing. Take Hitler, for example. Even if one imagines that he genuinely believed in the ideas he propagated and wanted to change the course of history, did he realize himself? No. He spent his entire life becoming and embodying the caricature of a villain with a mustache. Did he realize the spark inside him, the one that made people stand up and follow him? He doesn't know if one can realize themselves within the framework of our world. So how can a person get to heaven if there's a devil inside them? The homeless man says that all human emotions are manifestations of fear. The part of a person that lives in that fear experiences eternal torment in hell, but the other part of them is love. Even in the Bible, it's written that God is love. To get to heaven, one must choose God within themselves. The guy asks, "Are you God?" The homeless man laughs. He's unpredictable. Sometimes he calls him a homeless man, and sometimes God. He's a human being, but in him, just like in everyone else, there's a bit of God, a bit of love. But surely God must have had a purpose for him. He can't just have left him to live forever and await the end of the world for no reason. There must be meaning in all of this. And the Jew retells Plato's words. Horses are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a horse, which lives forever. Likewise, people are born and die, but they're just embodiments of the idea of a human, which lives forever. It will live until the end of humanity. Their meeting has no symbolism. He can consider that he just met the idea of a human, which he's always met, even in the mirror. All of them are embodiments of the idea of a human. Tall, short, sad, happy, lazy, successful, full, gloomy, and open. They all think they are unique, but new ones come to replace them. Year after year, century after century, they were children yesterday, and today they are already old. But even so, new ones come to take their place, running, jumping, munching, and leaving in just the same way. A phone notification rings. A woman walks around his car in the parking lot. The guy introduces the homeless man, saying he's the one who has seen Jesus himself. The woman thinks he's mocking her. She drove across the entire city, and he's here with a vagabond. The guy tries to explain. Then a man with the same face as the homeless man approaches and yells at him. He's been looking for him for over an hour. Bags won't carry themselves. The homeless man leaves with him. The guy is bewildered. They are identical. The woman says he's gone mad and gets into her car, driving away. The guy gets into his car and looks in the mirror. The eyes of Ahasverus are looking at him.